Chapter 431. A drowning man shouldn't desperately clutch at straws. Upon hearing Klein's question, Emlyn White jumped in fright as he carefully sized him up and said, "You're richer than I thought." He had imagined that Sherlock Moriarty would take at least a week to raise £2,450. "I've been saving for a long time." Klein sighed in response. Emlyn nodded thoughtfully. "It's so lucrative being a private detective. This is just an identity that makes things convenient. If you don't encounter a huge bounty, it'll be £200 to £300 a year," Klein said frankly. Emlyn glanced at him and asked casually, "So what do you actually do? Smuggling arms? Stealing from the vaults of the rich and powerful?" For Beyonders below Sequence 7, there's not much that can be done to save up more than £2,000 so quickly. And most of them are gray areas that border on breaking the law. "You, a vampire, are talking to me about breaking the law? It seems like you're rather eager to make some quick money." Klein smiled. "Except some relatively dangerous missions. If you aren't afraid of death, you can try." Emlyn shut his mouth, and only after a long time did he say, "Come and find me in the evening. I'll take you to the seller's place." What an obedient vampire. Klein was about to agree, but he suddenly found it unsafe. What if the seller gets thoughts from seeing all the money? What if he doesn't have the corresponding Beyonder ingredients, and is trying to fool me to commit a robbery? Emlyn White can be trusted, but not necessarily the seller he's introducing. I have to find an excuse to perform a divination, above the gray fog, to confirm the degree of danger. Yes, there's no need for it to be so complicated. There's a better way. After some thought, Klein turned his head to look at Emlyn. "No, go by yourself. I'll give you £1,000 as a deposit, and you'll bring the 2 ingredients to the Harvest Church. After confirmation, I'll pay the remaining balance. I believe the seller will accept this method. This will show the credit of a noble sanguine." Upon being flattered, Emlyn unconsciously lifted his chin. "There's no problem with this way of trading." Saying that, he let out a laugh. "Are you afraid that the other party will not keep their word? Are you more at ease in the Harvest Church?" Of course, anyone would feel safe when they see a Mother Earth adorer by the side, who is over 2 meters tall, and has exceptionally firm muscles. Klein smiled and pointed at Father Yutravsky. People who can deal with him wouldn't mind £2,000 to £3,000. Emlyn's face darkened and he snorted. "Aren't you worried that I'll steal the £1,000 deposit?" Klein casually looked straight ahead. "Why should I be worried? You will come back here every day, making it easy to find you. And a living creature like a vampire would sell for more than £1,000. Emlyn, who had been hit in a sore spot, muttered in exasperation, "Sanguine. Do you understand? Sanguine. Also, don't call me a creature." Klein chuckled and didn't say anything as he waited for Emlyn to calm down. "We'll do it the way you requested." Finally, Emlyn reached out and rubbed his temples. Klein immediately took out the envelope he had received that morning, and he handed it to him along with the thick stack of cash worth £1,000. "See you here at 8 tonight." After counting the bills and after confirming that there was no mistake, Emlyn warily stole a glance at Father Yutravsky and said in a low voice, "Mr. Private Detective, with you being in contact with a lot of intelligence and news, have you heard of an evil god known as the Fool?" "Evil? Evil? UF." Inwardly, Klein nearly threw out a profanity. He answered with the most normal expression, "Many people are searching for believers of the Fool recently. Are you planning on joining their ranks to obtain the relevant bounty?" Emlyn sighed and said, "No. I'm only considering whether I should ask this evil god, or the evil soul to help me dispel the psychological cue. As you know, the rumors going around include his specific honorific name, and as long as it's converted into Hermes or Ancient Hermes, it's possible to get a response. What do you know about him? How much harm will he bring to his believers? Will he forcefully change the believers' views? Although it points to me, I still have to say, my dear vampire friend, you are like a drowning man desperately clutching at straws." Feeling mixed emotions, Klein said, "The Fool is very mysterious. Up to this day, apart from the news you already know, no one knows of his detailed situation. For example, how vast his clergy is, or what sort of corresponding prayer rituals there are. What puzzles me is that you aren't considering the 2 of your vamp. a sanguine's ancestor, the ancient goddess Lilith. As long as the ritual is correct and the offerings are appropriate, she will help you dispel the psychological cue. Emlyn leaned back slightly and stared straight ahead, saying nothing for several seconds. He seemed to instantly become sullen. After a brief moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "Before the cataclysm, the ancestor had already rarely responded to prayers. Only certain special circumstances allowed us to get her help. This does not include the removal of a psychological cue. In the legends of the City of Silver, the ancient goddess Lilith, who represented the moon, had already had her authority taken back by the awakened creator. Or perhaps she had fallen in some battle among the gods earlier on. Then, who is the one occasionally responding to the sanguine's pleas? The primordial moon?" Klein deliberately pressed. "Then, there's still the primordial moon to pray to. Many underground beyonders have rituals that borrow his power. This is mainly referring to the shaman king and the corresponding biological creatures," Klein added inwardly. Emlyn's lips quivered, but he didn't speak as there was an indescribable fear on his face. After a long time, he solemnly said, "I suspect that the primordial moon was impersonated by some evil god or a high-level devil. People who pray to him mostly experience change, turning cruel, crazy, and even filled with desire. And the remaining ones, with the sanguine mainly, there is a higher chance of them losing control and becoming true monsters. There was once a powerful sanguine that tried to pray due to some danger, but she ended up turning into nothing but a hunk of meat that only knows to mate and reproduce. She, together with bulls, rams, stallions, mice, and even plants and rocks, gave birth to one strange descendant after another. Each one of them developed their own monster species. Thankfully, she was quickly eliminated along with her descendants. The primordial moon is that dangerous? There was no mention of it in the Book of Secrets. Had Shaman King Klarman's thoughts been corrupted? Fortunately, I only referenced, modified, and prayed to myself." Klein's heart raced in fright as a result of Emlyn White's description. This made him acutely realize that the hidden existences other than the 7 deities were indeed not that trustworthy. "Except me," he sighed. At that moment, Emlyn smiled bitterly and said, "If the negative effects brought by the fool isn't that great, praying to him might be something to consider. The only effect is that you will pay a certain amount of money for it." In order to maintain his image, Klein could only pat Emlyn on the shoulder and draw a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. It's very dangerous to pray to a hidden existence that you don't know about. If you're considering that, you might as well choose a faith out of the 7 deities you prefer. They won't affect your daily life and won't make you abandon your dolls. If there's really no other way. Emlyn suddenly found himself calmer than he had expected. Klein didn't linger on. He pushed his way out into the aisle and walked out of the Harvest Church. Looking out at the misty sky, he began to think about what to do next. There was no doubt that his current focus was on saving money and finding the ingredients. Little Son's side needs to stabilize a little more. To prevent him from being suspected again, I'll use the method of ridding a rampager's mental corruption as the promised payment. The deep-sea Naga's hair can be entrusted to Mr. Hanged Man. I'll have to rely on myself for the human skin shadows characteristic. There hasn't been any relevant information from Emlyn White and Eye of Wisdom, Mr. Stanton, for over a month. I'll have to try different channels. Yes, it's been quite long. It's likely that the high-sequence beyonder of the Rose School of Thought isn't monitoring the Bravehearts bar that closely. I'll go visit it in the evening and see if I can contact Miss Sharon and Merrick. Klein quickly had an idea. In order to go to Braveheart's bar, he had to first go to East Borough and change his worker's clothes in the 1-bedroom apartment he also rented on Black Palm Street. As he thought of this, he walked towards the carriage stop on the opposite side of the road. West Borough, inside Grim Cemetery. Furs Wall, who was dressed in a black veiled hat, quietly walked beside Dorian Gray, a member of the Abraham family. She had accompanied him to place flowers on Lawrence, Elisa, and Company's graves. While walking silently, her thoughts were completely focused on the beyonder ingredient, the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. She knew that she had already digested the apprentice potion, and as long as she could get the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch, she would become a trick master. However, She ultimately lacked the clues related to it, and the son, that she had the most expectations at being able to help her, didn't dare to hold a ritual or invite friends to hunt spirit eaters because of what had happened before. In order to advance as quickly as possible and escape the curse of the full moon, she had even asked Mr. Fool for help, hoping that his adorers could help her find the ingredients. In the process, she revealed that she had published her new book and was about to receive a fixed fee for the book. In order to prove that she had sufficient power to purchase it, she didn't fear that her real identity would be known by Mr. Fool, because she believed that Mr. Fool clearly knew it. In the secluded, quiet, and cold environment, Furs and Dorian stopped at Lawrence's grave. Looking at the photo taken after his death and reading the epitaph, "He's a good teacher," Dorian Gray remained silent for a long time before sighing. "How ironic. Why?" Furs asked in surprise. She had heard Lawrence mention that he was a public school teacher in Constant City, Mid-Seashire, and that was why she had used such an epitaph. "This has nothing to do with you. It has to do with our family." Dorian gave a self-deprecating laugh and bent down to put down the flowers. After straightening his body, he looked straight ahead and suddenly spoke out. "Furs, do you want to become a Beyonder? The kind I described in my letter?" Chapter 432. Contracted Creatures. Dorian Gray's question didn't surprise Furs at all. She had been prepared after keeping in contact with him for the past month, and she had even asked the experienced Mr. Hanged Man at the Tarot Club to decide what kind of expression and reaction she should use when faced with the question. "Are there really such Beyonders?" Furs asked in surprise. Dorian gently nodded. "Yes." He looked around to make sure that there was no one around. Then he walked up to a tree with fallen leaves and pressed his hand on it. Dorian's figure suddenly blurred, as if turning into a reflection in the water. When it was clear, he had already appeared behind the tree, his posture unchanging. "Oh God, that's really amazing." Remembering the teachings of Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice, her mouth opened in a semicircle as she exclaimed. Dorian walked back, smiled, and asked, "Do you want to become such a Beyonder?" Furs fell silent for a moment before she answered him excitedly. Yes, now that she was finally going to be a periphery member of the Abraham family, many things would be much easier for her in the future. Her heart was filled with genuine joy. Dorian laughed before turning his expression grave, asking in all seriousness, "Are you willing to be my student?" Furs nodded. "Yes." Dorian let out a sigh of relief, and then made a self-deprecating comment. "I'm not a good teacher. I even taught a. There's no need to mention the past anymore. In short, don't hold too high of an expectation." After considering it over this period of time, he had decided to learn from his previous experiences and lessons. He didn't tell Furs the situation regarding the Abraham family, and only treated their relationship as one of teacher and student. That way, he didn't have to worry about the other party coveting his family's few remaining mystical items. "No, your explanations of mysticism are excellent, really, Mr. Gray." "No, teacher." Furs quickly confirmed the relationship between them. Dorian looked at the tombstone, shook his head, and exhaled. "I wasn't planning on taking in any more students, but your noble character infected me. If nothing unexpected happens, I can give you the corresponding potion today." "Today?" Furs asked, surprised. Back when she went to Backlund Station to pick up Dorian Gray, she noticed that he was carrying only a very small suitcase, barely enough for a change of clothes. There was no evidence that he had any Beyonder ingredients on him. Does he have his own resources and channels in Backlund, ones that belong to the Abraham family? Furs made a vague guess. Her original plan was to rely on the inconvenience of the distance between them to sell off the Beyonder ingredients for the apprentice potion, and then tell him that she had successfully advanced to become a Beyonder. This way, she was able to obtain a considerable amount of cash, as well as to avoid the tragic consequence of taking the apprentice potion again and having to spend time to digest it. "Yes." Without explaining, Dorian pointed in the other direction. "Let's go see La Barrow and Elisa first." Taking a turn, they left Grimm Cemetery and returned to the house in Sherwood Borough, which Furs and Zio had rented. For the past month or so, Zio, who had advanced to sheriff, had been leaving early and returning late every day in order to pay off her heavy debts. She had been trying hard to get every bounty she could get, so there was no doubt that she was of the house around noon. Is there a quiet room? Dorian looked around casually. Plenty. Furs led her new teacher into the activity room on the first floor. Dorian circled the room, checked the surroundings, and then asked Furs to light a candle mixed with a piece of dark red sandalwood. He closed the door and drew the curtains. He walked to the candle and took out 2 bottles of essential oil and some common herbal powders. Holding a ritual? Shouldn't there be 3 candles? Furs curiously watched from the side and didn't rashly open her mouth, as if she was stunned by the atmosphere. After finishing the first part of the ritual, Dorian took a step back and, with a serious expression, switched to the language of ancient Hermes. I summon in my name special spirit bodies roaming the upper realms, the void creature that loves music, Dorian Gray Abraham's contract companion. Whoosh! There was a sudden gust of wind in the activity room, and with a sobbing voice, the flickering candle flames were tinged with a deep blue hue. The rings of light quickly spread out, forming a door that was beyond the concept of normality. A ball of semi-illusory and half-corporeal objects flew out from the bottom of the circle of light. Its entire body was colored a milky white. There were no eyes, nose, arms, or legs around it. Only an opening which resembled a mouth cracked open over its surface. Dorian grinned, opened his mouth, and began to hum a gentle folk lullaby. The ball swayed left and right, appearing extremely satisfied. After he finished humming, Dorian extended his hand. Malmouth, give me the items that I deposited with you the day before yesterday. The ball jumped up and down as its body suddenly swelled while it opened its mouth extremely wide. Then, it spat out 2 Beyonder ingredients which had strange lusters to them. To think that can be done. Furs stared in surprise. Dorian caught the apprentice potion's main ingredients, cancelled the summoning, and ended the ritual. He turned his head and smiled at Furs. Even in the spirit world, void creatures like Malmouth are extremely rare. Under normal circumstances, summoning rituals will not point to them. An elder of a sufficiently high sequence must enter the spirit world, and after a long period of searching, make a contract with one of them. That way, it will allow subsequent descendants to complete a summoning ritual with their corresponding name. After the void creature arrives, a new contract can be made, making them closely connected to oneself and no longer summonable by others. So that's how it is. That sounds interesting, Furs said from the bottom of her heart. She couldn't help but look forward to the future. If I don't consider the curse of the full moon, or how ordinary Beyonders are being suppressed and constantly facing danger, exploring this wonderful world would be the most delightful thing. I hope that one day I can truly roam the spirit world. Dorian responded with a chuckle. Malmouth's greatest ability is to swallow many items into its belly without causing them any harm. It's the equivalent of a mobile, hidden warehouse that almost no one can find. Of course, it can't store too much as its stomach has limited space. Also, it doesn't like people without talent in music. It would reject signing a contract with such people. At least I can play the lyre. Just as Furs breathed a sigh of relief, Dorian instructed her to get him a black stew pot. Realizing that he was about to concoct the potion right there and then, she maintained her expression, but her heart was frantically praying for an accident. I don't want to drink the apprentice potion again. That would waste a lot of time. If I had known that this would happen, then I would have been more honest. It's too late to tell the truth. Teacher Gray must have tried a divination attempt, but the outcome suffered interference. Confessing now would mean that there's a powerful person backing me or instigating me. In the midst of her thoughts, she saw Dorian turn around and hand her a bottle of the bubbling potion. Drink it and you'll become a Beyonder, Dorian said in a flat but very seductive tone. Then he reassured her, don't worry. There won't be any problems with me here. Okay. Furs gritted her teeth, received the apprentice potion, and drank it all in one gulp. At the same time, a thought flashed in her mind. Honesty is the best policy. The carriage stopped outside East Borough, and Klein, walking with a cane and a hat, entered the spacious slum in a relatively decent neighborhood. As he walked forward, he saw two familiar figures emerge from the relatively clean apartment in front of him. They were girls, one 17 or 18 years old, the other 15 or 16 years old, daughters of the laundry maid Liv, Freja, and Daisy. The latter had once been kidnapped by Capem and was rescued by the Dark Emperor. Daisy also spotted Klein and smiled brightly. "Good afternoon, Detective Moriarty." Klein smiled and nodded before asking in puzzlement, "Daisy, don't you have public elementary school to attend?" At the behest of reporters like Mike Joseph, and the push by the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the Backlund government established a charity fund with Capem's estate, specifically to help women and families who had been hurt by Capem. Daisy's family took advantage of the opportunity to move from a shabby apartment in an environment with poor security to the outskirts of East Borough. They moved from one room to two, separating the laundry area from the place where they ate and slept. In addition, Daisy received a bursary for attending a public elementary school, and she was delighted that the charity fund was responsible for her tuition and meals costing 3 pence a week. What puzzled Klein was that the public elementary school only had breaks on Sundays, so Daisy wasn't supposed to be here at this time. "The school is very close. I took advantage of the afternoon break to return and help Freja bring the washed and dried laundry to a client. She and Mother can't handle the workload," Daisy answered frankly. The immediate effect of her going to school was that the amount of laundry which Liv and Freja could do every day decreased, obviously lowering their family income. If it wasn't for Mike's help applying for a grant from the charity, then they wouldn't be able to maintain their present lives. Therefore, there was no doubt that Freja wouldn't be able to enter a public elementary school. And when Daisy and Klein talked about it, her eyes were filled with unconcealed envy and pain. Despite not even being 18 years old yet, all she could do was silently watch her sister attend school. Klein noticed that detail and deliberately reminded Daisy, "You really should know that your mother and Freja are having a hard time. Treat them well." Daisy nodded seriously and said, "I've thought about it. When things settle down, I'll teach Freja what I learned during the day at night and on Sundays. I'll be her only tutor." Freja's eyes suddenly blinked, and she couldn't help lowering her head. "Good, very good." Klein praised her before bidding them farewell in a good mood, and he turned to another street. He went to Black Palm Street to change out of his worker clothes, and just after he left the apartment where he was renting a room from, he saw an old middle-aged man walk over. He asked with a kind face, "Sir, have you heard of the original creator?" Chapter 433, Intelligence Peddler, the original creator? Klein was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately thought of the intelligence that old Kohler had previously given him. Recently, there had been people preaching the faith of the original creator in East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district. It pushed the belief that he hadn't really passed away, and that he existed in the body of every human being and every object. As long as one served him wholeheartedly and praised him, then not only would his believers be redeemed after death, but they would also enter his kingdom. They would also suffer tremendous improvements in their present life, for instance, having sizzling meat to eat every day. This was very close to the Aurora Order's theory of the mutated creator. So Klein had decided that it was the secret organization which was behind it. He felt that they had begun to value the vast majority of the poor after the Lenevis incident. "They've already developed so arrogantly to even solicit people on the streets?" Klein hesitated and replied, "I've heard of that." The well-dressed middle-aged man immediately revealed a smile. "Then, do you know about the incoming apocalypse? Do you know that the original creator will create a sanctuary to protect his believers?" For a moment, Klein thought of going with the flow and be inoculated so as to slowly infiltrate the Aurora Order's periphery organization, so as to gather the appropriate evidence and clues to take revenge on them for seeking the believers of the fool. But after careful consideration, he felt that it was too dangerous. It was something that was tiring and troublesome for him to do alone, without any certainty of success. In the end, he decided to inform the machinery hive mind about the current situation and leave it to the official organizations to handle. After thinking through the problem, Klein's expression immediately darkened. "I don't know, and I don't want to know." He strode forward, shaking off the middle-aged man and ignoring his shouts. On the way out of East Borough, he watched carefully and found that the workers who had lost their jobs due to the off-season and the efficiency improvements from textile machines were grouped together. They were being comforted and were listening to the preaches from people of unknown identities. The investigations of East Borough, the dock area, and factory district were completed 2 months ago. Why haven't the 3 churches and Parliament produced any concrete measures yet? The importance that they've placed on this issue must have increased. It's impossible for them to not notice the current situation. Is this a trap for bigger fish? That's very risky and can easily get out of hand. As Klein lampooned, he pushed the cap on his head as he walked out of East Borough and went straight to the Backland Bridge area. At noon, the Bravehearts bar had just opened, and there were almost no drunkards present. Only the nearby, busy workers would come in and grab a simple lunch. Klein mingled with them and spent 10 pence on wheat bread with pork sausages and a glass of Southville beer, making himself appear rather rich. After leisurely filling his stomach and finishing his beer, he looked at the bartender. Is Casper's Colleen in here? He planned on replenishing some of his ordinary ammunition while he was here. The bartender glanced at him. It seems like you haven't been here in a while. Casper's is dead. It's said that he was a little restless while sleeping at night, wrapping himself in a tight bundle and suffocating himself in the end. Haha, I don't really believe that kind of thing would happen. I've only heard about such things in ghost stories, but that's what those black and white dogs say. Black and white dogs were referring to the police who wore black and white check uniforms. Suffocating himself to death? That sounds like mysticism. Was it because the Rose School of Thought's high-sequence beyonder was unable to find Miss Sharon and Merrick, and thus, they chose to kill someone to vent their anger? Where's the bearing of being a high-sequence beyonder? In that case, Casper's wasn't able to contact Miss Sharon. Perhaps they've already left Backland. Casper's wasn't prepared for the dangers of the beyonder world. If it were me, I wouldn't have returned to the Bravehearts bar. I would have taken all the money I saved up and go to another city for a change in environment. However, under normal circumstances, a high-sequence beyonder wouldn't specially deal with such ordinary people. At most, they would force a mediumship ritual, without considering the aftereffects. As expected of the self-indulgent Rose School of Thought, to think a high-sequence beyonder would actually do such a thing. While feeling surprised, Klein also felt pity for the black market arms dealer. The bartender wiped a cup and continued, If you wish to buy some stuff, there's a new dealer. Who? Klein asked in passing. Old man. He's in billiard room 3, the bartender said without looking up. Klein immediately stood up, slowly walked towards that familiar place, and knocked on the unlocked door. Come in. A voice rang out. This voice sounds a little familiar. Klein pushed open the door and looked inside. Standing by the table was a boy that didn't look too old. He was dressed in an old overcoat, a brown bowler hat, and had bright red eyes. It was Ian, whom Klein had met when he first arrived in Backland. Back then, he was entrusted with the case of Detective Zreel's disappearance, and was ultimately involved in the conflict over the manuscripts of a third-generation difference machine. He had been forced to pay a high price to have Mr. A from the Aurora Order kill the Intis ambassador that was sent to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Mudon. It's you, Detective Moriarty. Ian was startled. He had deliberately stuck 2 whiskers above his mouth to make himself look older. Klein smiled as he entered the billiard room and closed the door in passing. Long time no see. He was initially surprised that Ian had appeared here and had become a black market arms dealer, but then he thought of the details behind the matter and found that it made sense. Klein being able to come to the Bravehearts bar and find Casper's Kalinin was all thanks to Ian's introduction. This teenage boy definitely had some connections around here. Yeah. Ian wiped away his shocked expression and mumbled. I went to Pritz Harbor for 2 months and found those guys to be so savage and cruel. They didn't even have the slightest bit of modesty or love for children. So I had no choice but to return to Backland and do what I was good at. When Casper's died, I decided to switch careers. Before Klein could say anything, he added, Mr. Detective, I've always kept in mind that I still owe you 2 requests. There's no need to explain so much. Nor do I care what you've done in the past. Although I've always thought that your escape from MI9 was suspicious, I didn't care too much about it. Klein picked up a cue stick, gestured, and said, "Other than dealing in black market weapons, you seem to be selling information?" "Yes," Ian answered very calmly. "What do you want to know?" "It's free." Very straightforward. Feeling guilty about what happened to me previously, Klein pushed the cue stick forward and hit the ball, sending a red ball right into the middle pocket. Without a trace of politeness, he straightened his body and said, "Recently, everyone has been looking for the believers of the Fool. There are many bounties available. What news do you have?" Ian thought for a moment and said, "Nothing. I even suspect whether the Fool has any believers since no one can find any clues." "This is what you call blasting air with a cannon." Klein gave a silent, self-deprecating laugh before turning to ask, "In addition, there's another bounty. People are looking for a lecturer named Isaac Eggers. I wish to know who was the one behind the bounty, so as to determine if I should involve myself in it. Searching for people is very time-consuming." Ian didn't directly answer. He surveyed his surroundings and lowered his voice. "Me9. It's not the numinous episcopate. It seems like it really was arranged by Ensanguil. He's trying to create conflict between Mr. Isaac and MI9? Perhaps he knows some secret that he shouldn't be aware of?" A series of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Finally, he smiled and said, "Looks like I don't have to worry about the bounty being false. But I'm afraid that the circumstances as to why Isaac Eggers is being pursued by MI9 is because he knows some secret. That being the case, the day I obtain the bounty might be the last day of my life." Ian spread his hands. "I'm not sure about that. But you can provide only clues." "Good suggestion." Without asking any more questions, Klein spent 5 solely, replenished some of his ordinary ammunition, and left the Bravehearts bar. He got on the rental carriage and looked out the window at the gloomy weather. Suddenly he felt a little wistful. Casper's Kalinin is dead, which also means that Miss Sharon and Merrick will give up this base. With me only being able to contact them unilaterally, it'll be hard to find them, unless they encounter some difficulties that require my help, or they have reached the stage of dealing with the evil spirit buried in the ruins. Otherwise, I'll likely not be meeting them again. Although they can't be considered friends, we've cooperated with each other twice. I could interact with them as a Beyonder without hiding my face. Now there are 2 fewer people of such people. If it wasn't for the Desire Apostle, I would only have an oddity like the vampire, Emlyn White, who I can talk about mysticism with without any disguises. Thankfully, as he was sighing silently, an ethereal voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "Is there something?" Klein instantly shuddered, and only when he saw who was sitting in front of him did he heave a sigh of relief. He laughed in exasperation and said, "Miss Sharon, do you always appear all of a sudden like this?" Dressed in a Gothic regal dress and a matching soft black hat, Sharon was sitting quietly on the other side of the carriage, her face as pale as ever. "I'll knock on the window next time." Sharon nodded without emotion. She didn't repeat the question, but she looked quietly at Klein in a reserved manner. Knocking on the window all of a sudden? That's equally scary. Klein was in no hurry to mention the matter about the human skin shadow, and instead he asked, "Has the high sequence Beyonder left?" "Yes," Sharon said tersely. Klein was slightly relieved as he warned her. "It could also be a trap." As he said this, he remembered something and quickly added, "I've finished reading the Book of Secrets, and I've obtained the corresponding information from other sources that praying to the primordial moon is prone to problems. It's best not to try." "All right." Sharon didn't ask why. She paused for a second and said in an ethereal voice, "The primordial moon and the chained god seem to be archenemies. Because they can switch sequences? Or could there be other reasons?" Klein thought as he directed the conversation to what really mattered. "Miss Sharon, do you know of any places with the characteristic of a human skin shadow? Like a puppet?" Sharon listened quietly before nodding her head. "Yes." Chapter 434. Tomb and Bounty She Knows? Klein was overjoyed and quickly asked where. In his heart, he was already prepared to pay the consultation fee. Sharon sat there without moving and said, like a talking doll, In one of the gatherings that Merrick participated in, someone once discovered the tomb of an ancient noble. They explored the periphery but didn't dare to venture deep. But there were traces of human skin shadow activity. They hoped to recruit a team strong enough to completely explore the tomb and split the valuables equally. To seek help in a gathering of Beyonders who are not familiar with each other. How can all parties guarantee each other's credibility? What if there's no tomb at all, and it's just a trap? Klein quickly thought and asked in response, "Did they succeed?" "Yes," Sharon answered simply. Klein temporarily didn't pursue the details. He suppressed his voice to avoid being overheard by the carriage driver. "And then, after that, they never appeared again," Sharon calmly recounted. "One of the members was a friend of Merrick's, and he disappeared completely after that matter." Without waiting for Klein to ask, she continued to speak with her ethereal voice. "Merrick found some of his friend's belongings. I used the method of divination to track them down to White Cliff Town. And I found a hidden entrance to the tomb at the river bend of the Stratford River. Merrick's friend was inside, but he was already dead." "You went in?" Klein blurted out. "No, I determined it using another method," Sharon explained. "That tomb gave me a sense of great danger. I didn't try to explore it." At this point, she looked at Klein with her blue eyes. Without the help of a sequence for Beyonder, or a sealed artifact of a corresponding level, it would be best not to venture deep into that tomb. "Even you find it very dangerous. I don't need to go above the gray fog to divine it to know how terrifying it is." Klein looked down at the floor of the carriage and thought for a few seconds. "Do you know which ancient noble's tomb it belongs to?" Sharon did not pause in her reply. "His last name is Amon." "Amon?" "A member of the family of that Amon who had possessed Little Sun's body and almost sneaked into the mysterious space above the gray fog." Klein used his ability as a clown to control the slight twitch of his eyelids. He asked in puzzlement, "Are you sure?" At this moment, a figure appeared in his mind, a black classic robe, a matching pointed hat, a broad forehead, a thin face, black eyes, black hair, and a crystal monocle. Sharon's pale blonde hair shone through the mist like an oil painting drawn by a master, and she said in her usual flat tone, "According to the items obtained from the initial exploration, a member of the gathering who specializes in ancient history determined that the owner of the tomb came from the Tudor dynasty of the Fourth Epoch. The family name is Amon. It really is the blasphemer family of the Fourth Epoch. This family isn't cursed like the Abraham family, nor was it destroyed directly by the church of a certain goddess like the Antigonus family. According to the special and powerful performance Amon showed in the City of Silver, the situation of this family might be comparable to that of Zaratul's. They were all secretly passed down, with the presence of high-sequence Beyonders among their ranks, perhaps even with powerful angels. They protect certain crucial secrets, such as the coordinates of the forsaken land of the gods. The danger of a tomb left behind by such a family can be imagined. Perhaps Amon can borrow the power of certain changes to cast his gaze over from the distant forsaken land of the gods. I can't use the perspective of a low or mid-sequence Beyonder to deduce the terror of a demigod. Klein didn't ponder for long before denying the possibility of exploring the tomb of the Amon family. Slightly disappointed, he looked up at Sharon. "Is that place the only place with a human skin shadow?" Sharon shook her head. "No." "Oh." Klein's eyes lit up, and he assumed a listening posture. Sharon said, her voice unchanged, "I've participated in a gathering. A Beyonder promised that as long as someone completes a mission given by her, she would satisfy any reasonable request. When it comes to ingredients, it is limited to those below that of high-sequence Beyonder ingredients. In other words, she can give any Beyonder ingredient below that of high-sequence Beyonders?" The first thought that came to Klein's mind was, is she bragging? Even for the Church of the Evernight Goddess, only the Holy Cathedral, or in other words, the Cathedral of Serenity, would possess such a possibility. Many of these ingredients weren't commonly needed, because they weren't needed at all. Upon hearing Klein's question, Sharon calmly replied, "She's a high-sequence Beyonder." "High-sequence Beyonder? No wonder. That would be on the level of the high-ranking members of the churches or secret organizations. Even if they don't belong to any party, they would still build up their own faction. However, the promise of any type of Beyonder ingredient below a high-sequence potion definitely can't be completely met. Klein momentarily had such a thought. Sharon simply added, she said that certain ingredients would require a certain period of time. That's more like it. Klein asked with interest. What mission did she give? Sharon sat up straight and dignified. Investigate Hero Bandit Dark Emperor's true identity. Klein believed that if he had been drinking water at that moment, then he wouldn't have been able to control himself, and that he would have sprayed it across from him. Who did I offend? Why am I the target of a high-sequence Beyonder? He first lamented in Chinese. Then he quickly analyzed the possible parties. Members of the Twilight Hermit Order. Because the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor had killed the Desire Apostle Beria? Members of the Aurora Order? They drew links to the Fool from the tarot cards I left during the Capim incident, and they decided to investigate the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor? Members of the three churches and MI9? Just to find out the truth about the Capim affair? Every one of them is possible, and none of them can be ruled out. Klein didn't show any abnormalities as he deliberated and asked, why is she investigating the true identity of the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor? No one knows, Sharon replied in the simplest of terms. Klein thought for 2 seconds and said after organizing his words, what kind of person is she? I want to know if I should take this mission. Sharon remained silent for 2 seconds, seemingly in recollection. Then she described, female above 170 meters tall, very well-proportioned chestnut hair, was disguised, loves black leather boots, only occasionally attended the gatherings, and first appeared 2 months ago. Loves wearing black leather boots, female, high-sequence Beyonder. When these 3 keywords were put together, it immediately triggered a certain part of Klein's memories. Back when he went to the Royal Museum to steal the Dark Emperor card, he had met a mysterious high-sequence Beyonder in the reconstructed study of Emperor Roselle. She only revealed her feet in black leather boots. And when he borrowed the power of the gray fog to escape, he ended up running into the devil dog, due to the side effects of the master key, and had to shout for help. Therefore, Klein Moriarty ended up meeting the female demigod again. Why would she look for Hero Bandit Dark Emperor? She's confirmed that the thief who stole the card of blasphemy is a spirit body, and knows what would happen if a spirit body carries and contains the Dark Emperor card. Hence, she has locked onto the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor, who has similar traits? Klein quickly thought of a very convincing possibility. The only thing that confused him was how the other person knew that he had taken the Dark Emperor card, and not any other cards, such as the Abyss card or the Sun card. Unless she was targeting the card of blasphemy, and she had investigated beforehand that it was the Dark Emperor card. Well, Miss Sharon said that she joined the gathering for the first time more than 2 months ago. This matches the timing of Roselle's exhibition. Later, she occasionally participated without leaving Backlund, or perhaps, she returned regularly to search for the enemy who had taken the Dark Emperor's card. Klein's thoughts blazed through his mind as he gave a faint smile. I'll keep an eye out for her. I hope there's something to be gained. She can forget about getting anything her entire life, he added inwardly without hesitation. Sharon nodded almost imperceptibly and said nothing more about the human skin shadow. Obviously, she only had 2 leads, but it was still better than the vampire Emlyn White and Eye of Wisdom Isengard Stanton's circle. Klein slowly exhaled, concealing his inward disappointment, and said with a respectful tone, you and Merrick aren't troubled by the curse anymore, are you? There's only one Scarlet Lunar Corona, Sharon answered calmly. The person who wore the Scarlet Lunar Corona was immune to the full moon's effects, a dream item for mutants. That is to say, one will be fine, and one will be in the same situation as before. When affected by the full moon, Merrick will be driven to insanity, while Miss Sharon will lose her strength. It appears Merrick is the one using it, Klein thought as he changed topics. Have you found a way to remove a rampager's mental corruption on the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Wraith Steve? He casually asked this question without much hope. In his heart, he believed that there was a greater chance with the sun. No. Sharon appeared like she was talking about someone else. Perhaps I will sell you this method in the future, and hope that you have saved up your gold pounds. Klein tersely acknowledged, and was suddenly unsure of how to continue the conversation. He paused for a few seconds before asking, "Where is White Cliff Town?" "Backlund suburbs south of the bridge," Sharon answered succinctly. She looked into Klein's eyes again. "Nothing else?" "Nothing." Klein first shook his head, and then asked, "Can I tell others about the tomb?" "Sure." Sharon's figure rapidly faded before she disappeared from the carriage. Perhaps it was to conceal herself, as she never had the habit of using perfume, thus leaving behind an empty environment once more. Chapter 435, Aggregation Effect. 8 p.m. Harvest Church. After changing back into his usual attire, Klein looked around once as he pressed down on the edge of his hat. Then, he walked into the hall and headed for Emlyn White, who was standing before 3 rows of candles on the right side of the hall. At the vampire's feet was a black suitcase. Its surface was seemingly covered with a layer of a wall of spirituality. Upon sensing Detective Sherlock Moriarty coming in, Emlyn was first pleased before revealing an alarmed look. He bent down to grab his suitcase and took a few steps back, closing the gap he had with Father Utravsky, who was focused on praying. "Are you afraid that I'll rob you of the Beyonder ingredients?" Klein stopped 3 meters away. Then he smiled and said, "Let me first verify if it's the 2 ingredients I need." Emlyn White ran his hand through his hair, lifted the leather case to his chest, and undid the buckle. The wall of spirituality shattered as a result, turning into a light breeze that blew through the prayer hall. Klein, who had long activated his spirit vision, immediately saw bursts of strange and dazzling light. It was the spiritual radiance released by many Beyonder characteristics. There were 2 small boxes inside the suitcase. One was made of tin and had many patterns on it. It looked Spartan and heavy. The other was only a cardboard box. Holding the black leather suitcase in one hand, Emlyn opened the slightly tarnished silver-colored tin case. The item inside looked like a yellowish-brown peeled walnut with the grooves and ridges of a brain. Along with the flickering of the candle flame, its appearance constantly changed. Sometimes it would turn gray and appear wrinkled. At other times, it would turn dark brown and extremely smooth. The colors would interweave, outlining a featureless face. At the sight of it, Klein felt the power of the potion, which he had completely digested and assimilated, stir a little, like a magnet encountering an opposite pole. He was able to control his body with his clown powers, as he suppressed the feeling of attraction. He knew deep down that the item was a genuine mutated pituitary gland of a thousand-faced hunter. It seems like what Emperor Roselle speculated in his diary is possible, that high-sequence items of the same pathway would unconsciously draw low and mid-sequence Beyonders to them, with a tendency to draw them together. Although the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland is still very far from a high sequence and doesn't have that kind of special force of attraction, it contains enough Beyonder characteristics. Moreover, I've digested the sequence 7 potion. When the person and ingredients are sufficiently close, such a phenomenon will appear. I didn't notice it before because firstly, the corresponding Beyonder ingredients are of low quality, and secondly, my own strength is lacking, and I wasn't of a high enough sequence. Right, every time I digested the potion, an illusory starry sky would appear around me. There were many resplendent lights within, and they would pull one another in an attempt to converge. This might be a scene of the law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics of the same pathway, and the greater the quality, the stronger the pull. Then, will Beyonder characteristics of similar pathways conform to this law? Klein's expression didn't change as he recalled the records in Roselle's diary, and combined with his 3 experiences of digesting potions, he was able to determine the existence of a certain law. Emlyn White glanced at him warily, quickly closed the tin box, and opened the paper box next to it. The paper box was padded with thick cotton, and in the center of the box was a glass bottle that could hold 200 milliliters of liquid. The bottle was half empty, while the rest of it was filled with a viscous liquid that could change its color based on the change of light. Any other problems? Emlyn closed the paper box. Let me confirm once more. Klein took out a gold coin and let it spin between his fingers, as though it had a life of its own. Ding! The gold coin bounced up and fell down again, landing in Klein's palm. It was heads, indicating a positive response. Klein nodded slightly and took out stacks after stacks of notes from various pockets. They were in £10, £5, and £1 denominations. £1,450. Klein placed the pile of cash on a nearby piece of furniture. Retreat a few steps, no 5 steps. Emlyn called out cautiously. Klein smiled, raised his hands and took 5 steps back. Emlyn cautiously moved closer, checking to see if there was any blank paper in the stack of cash. After doing a slight count, he threw the leather suitcase in his hand towards Klein. Klein was startled and with his agile moves, he accurately caught the suitcase. He was afraid that the blood of the thousand-faced hunter would seep out after the bottle shattered. And Emlyn White took the opportunity to collect the bills and quickly retreated to the side of Father Yutravsky. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and seriously checked the amount and their authenticity. At the sight, Klein recalled the scene and suddenly felt ashamed. He and Emlyn had made a perfectly fine church of Mother Earth Cathedral look like the scene of an arms or drugs trade. After confirming the condition of the 2 ingredients, Klein snapped his fingers, igniting a match he had specially separated in his clothes, and allowed the soaring red flames to envelop his body. When the flames descended back down, he had already disappeared. As he often met Emlyn White at the Harvest Church, he didn't mind if Father Yutravsky found out that he was a Beyonder who had helped him eliminate his dark personality. He even felt that this would give him some form of friendship. Emlyn, who was counting the money, looked up and was stunned for a good 2 seconds. He muttered to himself in a low voice, "My suitcase. My tin box." On the lamplit street, a carriage rolled over the puddles and headed for the edge of Empress Borough. Furs has told her good friend, Zio Dericha, that she had a teacher and had ended up consuming another apprentice potion. After confirming that she didn't have any signs of losing control, Zio looked outside the window at the gas lamps, which weren't much taller than she was, and asked in puzzlement, "I've always wondered why they're preserved as ingredients and not as a potion. Your teacher could have concocted the potion beforehand and brought them here, so there was no need for him to do it on the spot." Furs gave a faint smile and said, "I've asked him about this before. He said that there are 2 main reasons. One is that different Beyonder ingredients have different uses, and when they're made into a potion, they cannot be used flexibly. The second is that when the Beyonder characteristics are solidified, they can be kept forever, but after it becomes a potion, that won't be the case unless one uses a special isolation technique." "Why?" Zio asked in surprise. "This isn't an ordinary type of medicine or Beyonder weapon, in which its spirituality will continue to dissipate and weaken." Furs wasn't in the mood to laugh, but she had no choice but to maintain her smile. "It's not a problem about the characteristic loss, but that once Beyonder ingredients become potions, not only can humans absorb them, even other creatures or materials without life can. It's just relatively slower. For example, if I use a glass bottle to store the potion, it might appear fine, but after a few days, the glass bottle would finish drinking the potion, becoming a special mystical item. It might even gain intelligence. Of course, my teacher said that such a situation has very huge side effects, akin to what a rampager leaves behind. The 7 churches and some hidden factions have special isolation techniques, but it's rather troublesome, and they won't use it on low or mid-sequence potions." "How amazing," Zio sighed. She took another look outside and said in a low voice, "We're almost there." She and Furs were here to attend the Beyonder gathering which Mr. A was holding. Furs smiled while feeling her heart bleed. "I hope there's the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch." Her teacher, Dorian Gray, had taught her the acting method before he left. He even gave her the potion formula for Trickmaster, and got her to attempt to find the Beyonder ingredients on her own. If she hadn't gathered all of the ingredients by the time she digested the apprentice potion, she could write to him for help. This left Furs in a rather lost state. Why did I spend large sums of money to purchase the Trickmaster formula and the acting method? Up to now, the greatest and invaluable help the Tarot Club has given me were the things Mr. Hangman and Miss Justice taught me to take note of, as well as Mr. Fool's interference in divination. Otherwise, teacher would have long discovered a problem with me, and I wouldn't have become his student. Sigh. I'll just consider it as the price for neutralizing the full moon's curse. As the thought crossed her mind, Fur suddenly noticed that the house where Mr. A had his gathering held had visibly collapsed, and there were even scorch marks in many places. There was a fierce battle here. Who dealt with Mr. A? An official organization? Furs immediately signaled to Zio and instructed the carriage driver outside. Not here, 2 more streets up ahead. Aurora orders base found. Terrorist organization suffers severe setback. The next day, Klein saw this article the moment he flipped the newspapers open. Let's hope Mr. A died in this ambush. He drew the crimson moon on his chest in solemnity. He had already thrown the 1,000-faced hunter's blood and mutated pituitary gland from last night above the gray fog to ensure that they wouldn't be lost. Even if I die, they won't be lost. Klein chewed on a piece of bacon with great ease. After last night's transaction, his cash reserves had fallen back below £1,000, leaving him with only £735, which was only enough to buy a deep-sea Naga's hair. After that, he didn't have the ability to purchase the human skin shadows characteristic. Without any better clues or money, Klein rested at home the entire morning. After lunch, he dressed up and headed straight for the Backlund Bridge area. He had previously made an agreement with Carlson of the Machinery Hive Mind to find him at the Lucky Bar, near the West Balham dock, if he had any intelligence. If the intelligence was especially important and Carlson wasn't there, he was to go straight to Lever Cathedral. After all, Sherlock Moriarty wasn't a member of a secret organization, so there was no need for caution. There weren't many customers at Lucky Bar in the afternoon, so Klein instantly saw Carlson sitting and drinking alone in a corner of the bar. He walked over, knocked on the table, and reported with a suppressed voice. Many people in East Borough are spreading the faith of the original creator. Carlson sipped some alcohol brewed from pure malt, and replied non-committally, I'm aware. As expected, Klein commented silently before smiling. I have a clue regarding a 4th epic tomb of a noble. Ah. The glass in Carlson's hand paused as he looked at Klein in surprise, and he unconsciously nudged his thick glasses. But he noticed that Detective Sherlock Moriarty wasn't continuing to describe the matter, but looking at the bartender a few steps away while saying with a smile, 1 glass of Southville beer. Chapter 436. Klein's request. Seeing the white foam of the Southville beer being placed in front of Sherlock Moriarty, Carlson finally came to his senses. It was only when the bartender was a certain distance away from them did he ask in a suppressed voice, What do you want? Klein picked up his glass and took a sip. He took a few seconds to savor the bitter taste of the malt and the faint sweetness from it. Cheers. He looked sideways at Carlson and smiled before raising his glass. Without hesitation, Carlson shook his head and refused the offer, mumbling, You have beer, while I have strong distilled liquor. It's not suitable for a toast. Klein was only going through the motions, so he once again took a sip of his Southville beer, looked straight ahead and chuckled. What I want is very simple. I'm not sure what's inside the tomb, so I can only describe it rather vaguely. Well, I hope that I can choose an item from the spoils of your tomb exploration. I'm not greedy, and my requests will not involve high-sequence items. I wouldn't dare to take it even if they were one of the options. If you find nothing or there are only high-sequence items, then I don't want anything. Of course, I believe that when the latter happens, you wouldn't be stingy with giving me a sum of cash that's consistent with my contribution. After hearing about the Amon family's tomb from Miss Sharon yesterday, he had came up with rough plans. The first plan was to blow the copper whistle, contact Mr. Azek, and join forces to explore the tomb. However, there were many potential problems with this plan. Firstly, he was unsure of the amount of strength Azek, who was still in the midst of finding his lost memories, had regained. Secondly, Azek was being pursued by MI9, so it was very easy for him and Azek to land in trouble. Thirdly, there was a high chance that Klein would end up reappearing in the sites of sealed artifact 0-08 once again. Of course, he could also consider using the help of the gray fog to make contact or embark on the expedition. However, blowing the copper whistle above the gray fog made it impossible to summon the messenger, therefore, ending all of his subsequent plans. More importantly, Klein didn't dare to reveal the secret of the space above the fog to Isaac Eggers, whose identity remained a mystery. Therefore, he finally chose the second method, which was to use his identity as an informant to submit the information to the machinery hive mind and ask for a reasonable reward. When it came to the number of high-sequence Beyonders, which faction could have more than the 7 churches? According to what Klein knew, there were close to 10 high-sequence Beyonders in the Church of the Evernight Goddess. In other words, nearly half of the 13 archbishops and 9 high-ranking deacons had reached or surpassed sequence 4. This wasn't considering the adorer of the goddess, the Pope who helmed the church. Even if the situation regarding the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery was inferior in this aspect, it couldn't be that inferior. Their Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, Hormick Haydn, was a high-sequence Beyonder. And as such, for an Orthodox church, with all its resources accumulated to date, it wouldn't value the mid-sequence items very much. Klein believed that he could negotiate a reasonable price. Simply put, the core element of the second plan was, find an organization for any difficulties. Upon hearing Klein's offer, Carlson paused for a second, then blurted out, "Aren't you a believer in God?" "I've always had the goddess in my heart." Klein drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. "It is because of my belief in God that I've told you this information, not to the Nighthawks through Mr. Stanton. God said to let those who wish to be strong be strong. Only by becoming stronger and having more money can I have more access to different channels and resources, and thus provide you with better and more effective information." In order to convince the machinery hive mind, he had specifically spent the morning reading through the Steam and Machinery Bible that he had bought earlier. He then found a few sentences from the deity that met his requirements and memorized them. Carlson was momentarily unable to provide a rejoinder. He just sat there, stunned, to the point of forgetting to drink. Seeing this, Klein quickly added, "Moreover, this will help you establish a harmonious and efficient relationship with new generation informants. As long as you spread the news of the rewards I receive as a result of this, as well as keeping your promise without going back on your word, then I believe that the other informants will be deeply moved and be greatly motivated to do their best to gather useful information for you. Of course, I wish that you use my pseudonym when advertising this." Carlson listened with a blank face, picked up his glass and gulped down a mouthful. He almost choked. Cough. "Sherlock, the real you is completely different from what I remember about you from before." He sighed. The detective Sherlock Moriarty in his memories was good at analysis and reasoning. He was extremely calm and polite, and with a great sense of justice, had offered very effective advice. He was an outstanding believer in God. Yet now he was... Klein took a sip of his beer and chuckled. Everyone has their different sides. Using a single facade to face everything is prone to error. This is a problem you have to pay attention to when making deductions. After calming down for a moment, Carlson stood up and said, "I have no right to agree to such a request. I will report it immediately, so wait here for a while." "All right." Klein waved to the bartender and added a serving of potato wedges. By the time he leisurely finished his food and beer, Carlson returned to the bar with the deacon of the machinery hive mind, Ecancer Bernard. Ecancer looked around, and seeing that there was no one around, he said in a deep voice, "There's no problem with your request, but there's one condition to add on. Items with strong side effects and curses are not among the items available for selection. What I want is an ingredient." Klein immediately laughed. "All right. Dare I ask again if is this your personal decision, or the response from the higher-ups? I have the right to make such a decision." Ecancer used his hat to press down on his fluffy hair. "But since it concerns an aristocratic tomb from the 4th epoch, I had sent a telegram to the Archbishop, and he didn't object to it in his reply." "All right. Klein drew another triangular sacred emblem on his chest. I'll give you the information now. Cancer shook his head subconsciously. He looked around and pointed to a billiard room. Let's talk inside. This deacon, who is always publicly placed on trial by the mirror called a Rhodes, is quite experienced. Klein murmured and followed Cancer and Carlson into the billiard room, while making sure that the adjacent rooms were empty. Klein paused for a few seconds and said with some deliberation, "The thing is, there was a beyonder who found a hidden tomb at the mouth of the Stratford River in White Cliff Town. He searched the periphery and found some items. After that, they recruited people and did further explorations, but no one returned. If you search carefully over there, you will definitely find the corresponding traces." After listening carefully, Cancer asked, "Are you sure it's an aristocratic tomb from the 4th epoch?" "The items on the outside can prove that they're members of the Tudor dynasty's Amon family," Klein answered truthfully. He then warned him, "The Beyonders who died in there weren't weak at all, and there were quite a few of them. I believe that this tomb isn't something that can be explored by those below high-sequence Beyonders." Amon. Cancer frowned instinctively. It could be seen that as a deacon, he had the authority to know some ancient secret history. Without waiting for Klein to emphasize it again, he looked up and said, "We will collect the relevant information first before we act. A 4th epoch aristocratic tomb is very dangerous. Don't tell this information to anyone else, or explore it yourself. Otherwise, you and your friends will only lose their lives." "If I dared, I wouldn't be sitting here." Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and said, "My reputation has always been good." After making the deal, he watched Cancer and Carlson leave before putting on his hat and sauntering out of Lucky Bar. Towards the nobles of the 4th epoch, as well as the Amon family, the machinery hive mind will still be very cautious. They'll have to have at least several days of preparing before they take action. Prudence. Klein's random thoughts froze on a single word. He thought of another thing that could be described as being prudent. After Roselle had joined the ancient organization suspected of being the Twilight Hermit Order, he had actually never mentioned its name in his own secret diary, which was written in Chinese. Each time, he would refer to it by referring to it with the appropriate characteristics. This level of prudence was a very suspicious phenomenon. Why didn't Emperor Roselle dare to mention the name of that organization, even when it's written in Chinese? This is completely different from the style of writing, where he dared to write anything in his diary. What was he afraid of? Or what was he worried about? Could it be that as long as he said or wrote down the name of the Twilight Hermit Order, then they would be made aware of it no matter which language he used? Does one of their members, or a sealed artifact they possess, have such abilities? A guess popped up in Klein's mind, but there was no way to confirm it unless he was willing to take the risk. I'll first assume it's true, and that I haven't been perceived by them, because the channeling of the Desire Apostle's spirit had been done above the gray fog. Informing Miss Justice of it was also done in response to a prayer using the gray fog. Well, it's almost Monday, and I have to remind Miss Justice at the Tarot Club not to say or write down the name Twilight Hermit Order. As for the reason, she can understand it by herself with me simply giving her a look. Klein quickly made his next arrangements and strode out of Lucky Bar. Seeing that it was still early, he took a horse carriage to the Quelag Club, intending to spend the afternoon there. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw the equestrian teacher Talum Dumont. This descendant of blue blood was seated in a corner, holding a glass of scarlet grape wine. His face was rosy, and he was sipping it in high spirits. "You seem to be in a good mood, Talum." Klein smiled and greeted him. Talum chuckled and said, "Because the new year is coming." Then rather excitedly he asked, "Sherlock, do you know what it's like to really like someone?" Klein showed a fake smile. "I'm sorry, I'm still single." Talum finished the rest of his wine, stood up, waved his hand and said, "That's a pity. Well, I have to get busy. By the way, thank you for introducing Mr. Fromm's cage." Klein recalled the investment of the bike project and sincerely expressed his gratitude. "When are you free these days? I'd like to get you to bring me around to sample some of Backlund's delicacies." After the new year, Talum put on his hat and walked with a smile to the reception hall. "Has this fellow entered the season of love?" Klein couldn't help but mutter. Just as he turned around and took a few steps, he suddenly heard a heavy thud. Klein jerked his head back and saw Talon Dumont on the ground. His left hand clamped tightly at his chest where his heart was. His body was convulsing non-stop. Klein hurried over. But at this moment, Talon had already spat out all of the white foam on his mouth, losing his last breath of life. In just a few seconds he had turned into a dead corpse. Chapter 437. Obituary. This wasn't the first time Klein had seen someone familiar die in front of him, but it was the most abrupt and unforeseen death. The expression on Talon Dumont's face, when he had asked about what it felt to really like someone, was a vivid expression of hidden excitement and flaunting, but one which couldn't be directly shared, due to the need of being careful as a result of certain factors. That was too fast. Normal diseases do not cause death so quickly. Klein's expression was solemn as he lightly tapped his molars to activate his spirit vision. He dropped to one knee and crouched down. He saw Talon Dumont's aura, and the colors of his emotions fading rapidly. Furthermore, there were strands of black gas wrapped around his heart like a snake, which were gradually dimming. A beyonder ability similar to a curse? Klein instantly made a preliminary conclusion. At this moment, a nearby red-vested attendant and a servant girl in a black and white dress ran over. They looked at the dead body on the ground in horror. His eyes were wide and round, and the corners of his mouth still had remnant white foam. Klein closed his eyes and instructed in a deep voice, "Go to the nearby police station and tell them someone died here." "Yes, Mr. Moriarty." The red-vested attendant immediately turned around and ran out the door, so flustered that he even forgot to put on his coat. Under the watchful gaze of the crowd, Klein didn't check Talon's belongings, nor did he try to pull out a few strands of hair for a divination attempt when he wasn't around anyone. His identity was already considered semi-official, so he could use the power of the machinery hive mind to conduct a follow-up investigation. There was no need for him to act as a lone hero. Thinking of the many times he had played cards with Talon Dumont, and how he had introduced clients and investors, and the love story that had been hanging in his mind for so long, Klein couldn't help but take a long, slow, deep breath. Who's Talon's murderer? Which beyonder, whose adept at curses, did Talon offend? Judging from his attitude today, he should be in a very happy and calm state, completely unaware of the fact that he has provoked a terrifying character. Questions flashed through Klein's mind, but his lack of understanding about Talon Dumont resulted in a lack of soil to nurture any inspiration. When the police arrived, he was questioned as a witness, and that wasted quite a bit of his time. It wasn't until all of this was over that Klein had a chance to leave Hillston Borough and head back to Lucky Bar in the Backland Bridge area. Carlson was still there drinking, the only difference being that his drink had been exchanged from a strong distilled liquor, made from pure malt, to golden, frothy beer. Klein raised his right hand, covered his mouth, and squeezed over. He lightly knocked on the table and said, "Is your job to drink here every day?" Carlson jumped in fright as he turned his head, relaxing only when he saw that it was Sherlock Moriarty. What is it now?" "This reaction is very familiar." Klein sighed silently and said gravely, "There is a case involving beyonders." Carlson looked around and saw that Lucky Bar already had quite a number of patrons. They were either hollering over their glasses or eager to fight in the ring. "Follow me, let's play a round of billiards." Carlson nudged his thick glasses and carried his beer to an empty billiard room. Klein followed, closing the door behind him. "Your alcohol tolerance seems pretty good," he said in passing. "No, I just drink very slowly." Carlson put down his glass and picked up the cue stick. Then he added inexplicably, "And I'd like some alone time lately." "I don't care about that." Klein pursed his lips and said, "I encountered a death at the Quelag Club in Hillston Borough. That was a friend of mine, a noble descendant, and an equestrian teacher. He's usually healthy and had recently been in a very good mental state, but just now he suddenly died in front of me. It looked like a heart attack, but my spirit vision told me that he might have been cursed." "You're adept at spirit vision?" Carlson asked subconsciously. "What sort of details did Mr. Stanton fabricate for me?" After becoming a machinery hive mind informant, they never even asked me which pathway I was, or which sequence I'm at, nor did they try to find out about my origins and background. Of course, letting an informant keep certain secrets of their own is also a common tactic used by official organizations. Klein frankly responded, yes, the chest of the deceased had some decaying, illusory black gas. It does involve the possibility of a curse and a beyonder. Carlson didn't ask further as he slowly nodded. Hillston Borough, that's the territory of our machinery hive mind. In the northwest of Backlund, which was the heart of the metropolis, Empress Borough and Sherwood Backlund came under the mandated Punisher's jurisdiction. The western and northern areas came under the Nighthawks, and Hillston Borough and Backlund Bridge area came under the machinery hive mind. Having said this, Carlson looked at Klein and attempted to confirm the details. What deity does your friend believe in? After thinking carefully for a few seconds, Klein replied hesitantly, the Lord of Storms. A believer of the Lord of Storms. Is he the only deceased? Carlson asked with a frown. Yes. Klein gave an affirmative answer. Carlson chalked the cue stick inside. We have no right to take the case. This is under the mandated Punishers. But I will pass on your information to them. In the Lone Kingdom, the principle of jurisdiction over beyonder events was first to divide them according to their beliefs. If they involved the followers of multiple deities, then it would be decided according to who held jurisdiction over the area. Klein was no stranger to this. He had no intention of making things difficult for Carlson, so he earnestly said, thank you. I hope they can find the real killer as soon as possible. Carlson picked up the glass of beer beside him and took a sip. He's a descendant of Blue Blood. The mandated Punishers will definitely take it seriously. Pausing for a second, he looked at Klein and said in a low voice, I find it hard to believe that you've only been in Backlund for about 3 months. You seem to have established a wide range of social connections and possess lots of resources here. Some people are naturally adept at this. Klein shook his head with a self-deprecating laugh before bidding farewell. By the time he got back to Minsk Street, it was completely dark and the gas lamps lining the streets were being lit by workers. Although his relationship with Talum Dumont didn't go deep, he was an acquaintance he met nearly every week. He was a friend he would play cards with every now and then, and Talum was rather warm and had always exalted him as a great detective. Furthermore, he had practiced what he preached by introducing clients and investors. His passing also made Klein feel sad, making him fully aware of his helplessness towards fate. Other than that, he was also very angry. He was angry at the murderer who had cursed Talum to death. I hope that they can figure out what happened. I hope that the mandated Punishers doesn't run out of manpower because of Duke Negan's assassination case. Klein sighed as he got off the carriage and walked towards the gate. In the process, he discovered that there was no light at the Sammers house next door. It looks like they're on their way to Desi Bay. Is this the New Year atmosphere in Backlund? Yet, I don't feel anything at all. Klein momentarily felt melancholic. With these emotions in mind, he went to bed early and woke up at 7 in the morning. In an attempt to change his mood, Klein decided to bake a homemade cake today. I'll buy the ingredients after breakfast, he whispered, drinking his milk and flipping through the newspapers. Soon he saw an obituary in the Tussock Times. My beloved son Talum Dumont passed away on December 18th due to a sudden heart disease. His funeral will be held at the Crown Cemetery at exactly 9 a.m. on December 21st. In the northern continent, due to reanimations, it was already an ancient tradition to be buried as quickly as possible after one's death. Of course, this was on the premise that there was no shortage of money for a funeral. Sudden heart disease. Is this the final result of the investigation? Or could it be that the mandated Punishers are trying to lull the culprit? Klein frowned, unable to make a judgment. Perhaps I can go above the gray fog to see if it's a trap set up by the mandated Punishers, but there's a high probability of failure. After all, I don't have one of his items with me, nor was I targeted. He took a breath, calmed down, and methodically filled his stomach. The subsequent attempt didn't exceed Klein's expectations. He could only leave Minsk Street and take a bus to Hillston Borough to visit Isengard Stanton. The great detective walked in the warm room, pointed to the front and said, "Sherlock, would you like some breakfast? My chef's skills aren't worse than mine." "No, I've already had breakfast." Klein shook his head and declined. Isengard stopped in his tracks and casually asked, "Where are you going to spend the New Year's?" "I'm planning on returning to Lemberg. I haven't confirmed it yet. Perhaps mid-Seashire," Klein said perfunctorily. The scenery there was originally pretty good, but unfortunately, there's an abundance in coal and iron resources. There was also a rather developed shipping industry. Isengard straightened his collar and touched the pipe in his pocket. "You seem to be a little anxious? Mr. Stanton, I have something to ask you." Klein took the opportunity when asked the question to relate, in detail, Talum Dumont's death, the results of his spirit vision, his advice to the machinery hive mind, and what he had seen in this morning's obituary. Of course, he had hidden the fact that he had become an informant for the machinery hive mind. He only said that for his friend, he had found an official beyonder he got to know due to the Desire Apostle case. "Do you think this is a trap by the mandated punishers?" he finally asked. Holding the pipe, Isengard said thoughtfully, "I've been trying to avoid the mandated punishers, and I don't know enough about the situation. I'll get someone to find out. If there's any news, then I'll write to you." "Okay, thank you." Klein bowed sincerely. In the evening, he received a letter specially sent from Isengard. There was only one sentence in the letter. "This case isn't handled by the mandated punishers. The royal family has taken the case by claiming that Talum Dumont is a noble." Chapter 438. Invitation the Royal Family. Klein held the letter he received from Isengard Stanton and silently murmured to himself. He looked up and outside the window, and he saw the rain pattering down. The gas lamps on the streets were giving off quiet halos. Inside the living room, the coffee table was neat and tidy, with a few stacks of newspapers placed in the corner. There was silence all around him. Klein sat on the sofa as he leaned forward a little. He sat there silently for a long time. After nearly 10 minutes, he exhaled and shook his head. Slowly and heavily, he tossed the letter into the trash can. He slowly stood up and expressionlessly walked to the second floor. And in the trash can, Isengard Stanton's letter caught fire silently and quickly crumpled into black ashes. On Monday morning, Klein stood in front of the mirror, pressed his right thumb and middle finger to his temples, and rubbed them with a little more strength. When he was done, he turned on the faucet, lowered his body, splashed the cold tap water onto his face, and washed his face while having a fit at the cold. After freshening himself up, he hung up the towel, walked to the first floor, and simply made a single-sided well-done fried eggs with buttered toast. Of course, a cup of black tea with a few slices of lemon quenched his thirst and reduced the cloy sensation he was feeling. After breakfast, as he was idly flipping through the rest of the newspapers, Klein suddenly heard the tinkling of the doorbell. "Who is it? A new commission? Could it be that the machinery hive mind has already finished exploring the Amon family's tomb? No, it can't be that fast." Klein muttered as he put away his napkin and newspapers and walked slowly to the door. When he held the handle, the image of the visitor outside the door appeared in his mind. It was an elderly gentleman dressed to a T. His snow-white shirt was starched, and a thick grayish-blue vest completely hid his belly. The long tailcoat had sharp lines without any blemishes on it. The gentleman was wearing a pair of shiny leather shoes, so shiny that it was impossible to tell if he had walked through the rain or mud. He wore a pair of white knitted gloves, with silver hair at his temples. His face was deeply wrinkled, and his light brown eyes were so serious that they didn't contain a hint of a smile. "I don't know him." Klein mumbled and opened the door. "May I know who you're looking for?" he asked politely. The elderly gentleman took off his hat, pressed it to his chest, and saluted in the most standard manner. "Mr. Sherlock Moriarty. I'm a butler who has come to invite you in place of my master." "Do I know your esteemed master? Why is he looking for me?" Klein's head was completely filled with questions. But at this moment, he had already noticed a carriage parked across the cement road. It had a deep black outer shell, and there was a curtain on the inside of the window. It was obvious that it was nothing ordinary. There's luxury amidst being low-key. Klein looked closely, and suddenly saw that there was a coat of arms in a conspicuous part of the carriage. The main body of the coat of arms was a vertical sword facing down, and the hilt of the sword had a red crown. That's the Sword of Judgment. It's the Sword of Judgment representing the Royal Augustus family. Klein's heart palpitated as he roughly understood the butler's background. Perhaps he's a rather powerful beyonder. Klein made a guess. The professional and stern butler didn't pay attention to his scrutiny. He revealed a polite smile and said, "You have never met my master, but in a sense you do know him. You have been providing him clues about the organization that is symbolized by the tarot cards, and he has paid for the money you need. As expected, it's the important figure that Talum mentioned. I've been using false information to fleece for funds, and even submitted all the reimbursements that old Kohler required to him. I can't refuse his invitation now, especially when Talum is dead." Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said, "Did your master come to me due to Talum's death?" "Yes, Talum was his friend. He was sad and confused by his death, and he heard that you were there when it happened," the old butler articulated clearly. "No, I wasn't." Klein subconsciously wanted to deny it, but he ultimately could only nod. "Yes, I saw Talum die in front of me. It's really a sad and regretful thing," the butler said in a sincere tone. "Are you willing to accept my master's invitation? Do I have any reason to refuse? That would just make me look very suspicious. I might even be killed on the spot by you." Klein looked at him and said, "I happen to have nothing planned this morning." "All right then. Mr. Moriarty, please." The old butler bent down slightly, extended his right white-gloved hand, and pointed at the carriage on the opposite side of the cement road. "Sigh. I've been trying to avoid getting involved with important figures. In the end, I have no choice but to face the person behind Talum after his death. I wonder if this would attract attention, or lead to more in-depth background checks. I have to plan ahead, and be ready to give up my identity and this foothold at any time. Also, I need to get the human skin shadow characteristic, and the deep-sea Naga's hair, and advance to faceless as soon as possible. In that case, my ability to resist risks would more than double." When Klein put on his coat and hat, and walked to the carriage with the royal coat of arms, he had already thought of the subsequent developments. At this moment, the servant the old butler brought with him opened the door for him. Stepping on the thick brown carpet, Klein looked at the wooden cabinets containing red wine, white wine, champagne, Lanty and black Rand, along with the crystal glasses. Klein felt rather restricted as he sat by the window. Lanty referred to strong distilled spirits made from pure malt. There were many types, such as the sailor's favorite Lanty proof. The bottles displayed in the cabinets were obviously of high quality. As for black Rand, they referred to strong distilled wines mixed with other fermented grains, which, like Lanty, was something unique to Lone. As the carriage drove through the wet streets, Klein asked in passing, "Are we going to Empress Borough?" "No. My master is waiting for you at the Red Rose Manor on the outskirts of Empress Borough." The old butler didn't hide anything. "Looks like this is the royal family's manor." Klein thought for a moment, then he asked with a smile, "Can you tell me your master's identity now?" The old housekeeper's back, which was already straight, became even straighter as he raised his chin. "He is the descendant of the founder and protector. He's the grandson of the Might Wielder, the 5th son of His Majesty, Duke of Lastings, His Highness Prince Edisac Augustus. So it's the 3rd prince, the 2nd youngest prince, but he should be around 21 to 22 years old." Klein recalled what he had seen in the occasional descriptions in the newspapers and magazines at the Quelag Club. The horse carriage passed through one street after another, going from an artificial lake to the northwest. After more than an hour, they finally arrived at an extremely large manor. At the entrance to the manor, Klein was inspected by 2 soldiers in red military uniforms and white trousers. He didn't hide the existence of his gun holster and revolver. He believed that there were definitely people around Prince Edisac who could tell that he was carrying a gun, and that it easily made things worse if he fooled them with illusions. "In any case, the prince knows that I'm a private detective, So his subordinates definitely wouldn't send guests to the police station just because I was illegally in possession of a gun. Klein watched as the soldier took the gun holster and revolver before he was informed to take it when he came out. After 2 more inspections, Klein followed the old butler, went around the main house, and came to a wide area with hills and flowing waters. The only drawback of this place was that the vegetation had long since withered away in the dead of winter, leaving nothing but desolation. Tap, tap, tap. Several horses came running from the distance and stopped in front of them. A young man in white trousers, high-heeled black boots, a fitted shirt, and a dark rider's tunic nimbly dismounted and walked over. Everyone else followed closely by his side. He removed his helmet from his head and smiled at Klein. "I'm finally meeting you, Detective Moriarty." Upon seeing this, Klein's eyes lit up. It wasn't because of how handsome he was, but because he looked like the Henry Augustus I imprinted on 5-pound notes. Edisac Augustus also had a rotund face and a pair of slender eyes, but he didn't look serious at all. Instead, he always had a smile on his face, looking young and spirited. "I didn't know that you, Your Highness, were the one who entrusted me with the task." Klein bowed. Holding a horsewhip in his hand, Edisac weighed it in his palm and chuckled. "I heard that you played an important role in the serial killer and Desire Apostle cases. Talem's recommendation was indeed good. Sigh. Who knew that he would be gone days after I was horse racing with him? He has gone to the kingdom of storm and lightning." Since the founding of the kingdom, the Augustus family had always believed in the Lord of the Storms. Without waiting for Klein to answer, he said with a heavy expression, "The investigation into Talem's death didn't go through me, Mr. Moriarty. I want you to help me discover the truth." The conclusion given by the rest of the royal family? Your 2 elder brothers? This sudden level of infighting isn't something I can handle. Also, Your Highness, your style is really direct. Klein sighed. "I'm sorry, but I'd still say that Talem died of a sudden heart disease." "Is that so?" News came from the mandated punishers that a detective by the name of Sherlock Moriarty had testified that Talem had signs of suffering from a curse. Prince Edisac chuckled. Klein could only respond with a wry smile. "Your Highness, you should know the principles I adhere to. I still wish to live another 50 years. Wasn't Talem your friend?" Prince Edisac asked. Klein was at a loss for an answer when a maid suddenly came from the main room, quickly approached the prince, and whispered a few words. Edisac's face stiffened. "Tell her that she's not to go out." After he finished speaking, he took 2 steps forward. His serious expression softened, and a hint of softness and helplessness appeared in his blue eyes. "But I will permit her to leave the room and walk around freely in the manor." Chapter 439. The generous prince. The scene before his eyes reminded Klein of the romance story which Talem Dumont had told him. His noble friend had fallen in love with a commoner woman and was insistent on marrying her. However, being in the top circle of the aristocracy, the marriage was absolutely prohibited. Talem had been vexed over this matter, and he had even considered the prospect of hiring a murderer. But in the end, he managed to persuade the woman to leave his friend on her own accord. Could the main character of this story be Edisac Augustus? The situation is very consistent in all aspects. As a prince, marrying a commoner is practically treason in this era. Since the founding of Lone, the spouse of a direct descendant of the Augustus family could only be a noblewoman. From what I've just heard, Edisac has brought that commoner woman back. And he has even grounded her as punishment? True love. In a split second, the story of a tyrannical prince and a pitiful frail white flower took shape in Klein's mind. He looked into the distance, enjoying the midwinter scenery. That's not what it really looks like. When spring comes and the grass sprouts, you'll see a golf course of the highest quality. Prince Edisac dismissed the maid, raised his whip and pointed around. "Golf?" Klein asked, simultaneously knowing the answer to his question. Prince Edisac motioned his guards and attendants away, leaving the old butler inclined to follow him by his side. He strolled on the desolate plains, chuckled and said, "Yes, golf. This is a truly aristocratic sport that even the owners of most magazines and newspapers have a hard time getting involved in. Although I don't like Roselle, I have to admit that the fantasy-like ideas he had have given us a world with plenty of fun. If you can figure out the truth to Talem's death, this place will always be open to you. It was indeed Roselle. Klein let out a light breath. Seeing that he didn't respond, Prince Edisac continued to lament. There is much to learn from Roselle in every way, but his attitude towards feelings makes me sick. Of course, this is the common nature and style of most of the Intis aristocrats, and it's also the source of their infatuation with luxury and debauchery in their lives. Looking ahead at the slow stream, Edisac said in a mature tone that was beyond his years, 99% of people are not geniuses like Roselle. In order to succeed and establish a great enterprise, one must first understand what they really want, and for that, they must be willing to pay the price and never turn back, while persisting all the way. As he said this, his tone became slow as he laughed at himself and said, "Before this year, I had always thought that I liked the daughter of Earl Hall very much. She has perfect looks, an elegant demeanor, a rich fortune, a distinguished family, and a very powerful father. She's someone that no prince can find fault with, but now I understand that what I'm really attracted to is something that I yearn to have even in my dreams. It's a unique temperament and profound soul born from experience. I'm not saying that Miss Hall is lacking in temperament, but that wasn't what I want, admire, or like. Your Highness, your tone, attitude, and expression are now almost identical to Talem just before he died. Don't suddenly die in front of me. Even if I were to jump into the Tussock River, there's no way for me to prove my innocence. Moreover, hearing much of this makes it easier for me to be silenced. Do you want to tie me to your chariot?" Klein felt a little afraid for some baffling reason. He cleared his throat and took the initiative to change the subject. "Your Highness, with your status and identity, you will certainly not lack subordinates. There are many people who are willing to investigate Talem's death for you. So why do you need me?" Edisac shook his head and chuckled. "As a prince, I have as much power as the little freedom I have. There are many things I can't let the people around me do, as there are too many eyes on me. You're a great detective with brains, and you have a good relationship with Talem. You were there at the time, so I don't think there's anyone better suited than you. Don't worry, if there really is a problem, then I can definitely guarantee your safety." Such a promise is like toilet paper in the bathroom. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. With Prince Edisac already saying this much, he felt that there was little chance of him leaving Red Rose Manor if he refused again. He could only sigh and say, "Actually, I'm as angry as you are about Talem's death, but reality has kept me calm." Edisac smiled. "What can I do for you?" "Talem's hair, either his flesh and blood, plus something he carried around with him." Klein made the request. "Okay, then I'll have these delivered to your house." Edisac agreed at once, and then asked curiously, "That's all?" Klein didn't stand on ceremony. "I will only know what kind of help I need when I have a preliminary lead. Your Highness, it's best that you give me a way to communicate with you. A private detective who frequently visits this manor would definitely arouse suspicion." Edisac nodded and said as if he was prepared, "I'll have someone secretly rent the house next door to you, 13 Minsk Street. When you need to make contact, write a letter to your neighbor about visiting, and put it in the mailbox. As for the reward, you should know that I'm not a stingy person, even if it ends in failure. As long as you contribute and take the risk, you will still receive the corresponding income. If you do find out the truth, I'll give you a reward sufficient for your retirement." This prince does things really swiftly and decisively. Retirement, that would be at least 3,000 pounds. Klein secretly sighed. "All right, may the spirit of Talem be at peace in the kingdom of storm and lightning." He bowed. Edisac nodded slightly and instructed his elderly butler, "Take Detective Moriarty out and back to Minsk Street. Why don't you keep me for lunch? Aren't you treating your guest in a little too arrogant a manner?" Of course, it probably has to do with it being a long time before noon. Klein silently teased him. He followed the old butler all the way out to the entrance of the manor and retrieved the gun holster, revolver, and the bullets. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein stood at the oriel window and watched the carriage with the royal coat of arms drive away. Sherlock Moriarty might die at any moment if the investigations really goes deeper. Who knows, someone might be watching me right now. Not for now, since I haven't made any moves yet. Klein frowned and stood still. At this moment, he was extremely eager to advance to Faceless. I can't afford to wait for the machinery hive mind's exploration of the Amon family's tomb. I have to continue trying to buy the human skin shadow characteristic via other channels. After all, no one knows how long the machinery hive mind's preparations will take. What if it exceeds a month or even half a year? That's not impossible. They can first send people to guard the entrance and slowly gather the corresponding information, so as to be certain that nothing goes wrong. It's not a bad strategy, but that's not something that I can afford to wait for. As thoughts raced through Klein's mind, he made his decision. At 2:45 p.m. he brought his newspaper into the bathroom and actively prepared for this week's tarot gathering. 3 o'clock sharp. A deep red illusory radiance rose as Audrey Hall looked around in a good mood. Last night, she had finally received the Sequence 7 psychiatrist potion formula she had been dreaming of. Her emotions were still a mix of excitement, agitation, and serenity. Furthermore, the psychology alchemists hadn't immediately asked her to make any contributions, claiming that it was in advance. They had full confidence in Miss Audrey's outstanding ability to repay them. No new members. Audrey stood up and gazed at the very end of the long bronze table. She raised the corners of her skirt and bowed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool, good afternoon." Her light and cheerful voice broke the unchanging silence above the fog, and it allowed Klein, who had been feeling a little depressed, to temporarily be rid of the troubles that the outside world had on him. He nodded slightly and responded to the members' greetings. When she sat down again, Audrey brought the other members into view and created a dynamic scene with the previous observations. When bowing, Mr. Hanged Man silently sized up Mr. Fool with inconspicuous curiosity. Then, he looked towards Mr. World in anticipation. In other words, with him having a deep relationship with the Church of the Lord of Storms, he knows about the details of Duke Negan's assassination and is aware of the appearance of hero bandit Dark Emperor. He has the desire to investigate the hidden truth behind this matter. There appears to be an outcome regarding the werewolf Beyonder characteristic, which Mr. World had entrusted him to sell, and he has also probably found the human skin shadow characteristics, or the deep-sea Naga's hair. The son's emotions are very stable and relaxed. This means that he believes that the City of Silver's surveillance on him has been lifted. What did he rely on to make this judgment? Has he been reallocated to the so-called exploratory teams? Furs is a little depressed despite feeling relaxed. She passed the Abraham family member's test and has become his student, but she was forced to accept something that was disadvantageous to her. Mr. World is as cold and deep as ever. Perhaps when I reach sequence 7 or 6, I'll be able to grasp his emotional changes and thoughts. While the Fool is still as mysterious, powerful, and unfathomable. A series of thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind. She looked at the figure shrouded in the gray fog and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have obtained 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." It was a copy she had requested from the psychology alchemists. However, as she had only mentioned it last night, Escalante only had the time to give her 3 pages in such short notice. "What kind of reward do you want?" Klein asked with a smile. Audrey replied sincerely, "Can you just treat it as the reward for answering my previous question?" As she said this, she had an inexplicable feeling of flaunting herself. "Mr. Hanged Man, and the rest of you still don't know the existence of the Twilight Hermit Order. Phew, how envious. I wonder what problem did Miss Justice seek guidance for in private. I'll write to teacher when I get back, and I'll ask him if he has Roselle's diary to the outside world notebook." Furs immediately had the desire and motivation. Under the Hanged Man's suspicious gaze, Klein nodded without any care. "Sure." Audrey quickly produced 3 pages of tawny diary entries and passed them on to Mr. Fool. Klein took them and read them. On the first page it wrote, January 13th, contact with Mr. Dorr stabilized. Chapter 440. Angel Family. Just as Klein picked up the diary, Audrey added, Mr. Fool, I still have 10 diary pages which will be given to you later. It is for the payment for your previous blessing. She repeated her private promise, so as to not let Mr. Fool think that she had forgotten about it. And the reason why she had provided payment for the information regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was to first settle the debt, while having the intention to show off a little. The payment for the blessing. Furs ruminated over these words, and suddenly realized an important oversight on her part. On the matter regarding the Abraham family, Mr. Fool had sent his angel to help me interfere with the divination. I should have paid an appropriate amount. Oh no, I didn't realize this at all. I thought, like all rituals, that it was the end to it once it was completed. For a moment, Furs fell into a panic. During ordinary ritualistic magic, if one prayed for help from a deity or a corresponding existence, they would perform a sacrifice in advance, burning essential oils, extracts, and herbal essence that pleased the target was equivalent to making an advance payment. But in the rituals corresponding to the Fool, there were many steps that could be omitted, and the price could only be paid afterward. Sometimes there wasn't even a need to offer anything. Furs, who was accustomed to the former, ended up only saying a word of thanks. She hurriedly looked towards the end of the long bronze table and earnestly said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, your divination interference had helped me greatly. I will try to find 10 Roselle diary pages as soon as possible as well." Seeing the performance of Miss Justice and Miss Magician, it dawned on Derek Berg that he had found a way to fully express his gratitude. However, the City of Silver doesn't have the diary pages of the so-called Emperor Roselle. Well, Mr. Fool is very interested in history, so I'll have to read more books and records on these. With a thought, Derek made a promise to Mr. Fool, who sat high above them. The hanged man watched all this from the side, and had no doubt that the Fool had an angel at his service. Any organization should have a character like Miss Justice. The power of a role model is limitless. With a lot of debts to collect appearing out of thin air, Klein happily sighed inwardly. As the high and mighty Mr. Fool, he always found it awkward to directly ask for compensation, and he had always believed that helping the members of his own organization was a normal and reasonable thing to do, without the need for him to make it so reliant on transactions. Thus, he didn't control the world to put on the appropriate performance to remind everyone. Of course, if Justice and the others were willing to provide payment, then Klein had no intention of refusing it. All right. He smiled and nodded before shifting his gaze back to the diary in his hands. January 13th, contact with Mr. Dorr stabilized. The powerful Beyonder, who's lost in the darkness and trapped in the storm, didn't rush me to complete a complicated and difficult ritual, so as to help him return to the real world. He seems to have understood that he has to come up with something that would move me, instead of giving me 3 intangible wishes, in order for me to consider whether I should take the hidden risks of saving him. Mr. Dorr temporarily didn't mention this matter and instead, with great interest, chatted about my tarot card creation. Haha, the word creation should be written with quotation marks. From this point, it's apparent that Mr. Dorr is able to make contact with the real world at particular times and through particular methods, and he should be able to observe a lot of details. While talking about the moon card, I thought of a matter Zeratul mentioned. He said that the life school of thought worships the moon, but not the Evernight goddess. Yes, I added the second half myself. Hence, I asked the 4th epic expert Mr. Dorr about this question. He chuckled and similarly didn't give a direct answer. However, compared to the furtive seer who speaks half-truths, making me want to beat him up, he's a lot more frank. He told me that if he were to choose a card from the tarot cards to represent the Evernight goddess, he wouldn't choose the moon, but the star. That makes things very interesting. I pressed, "Who is the real owner of the moon?" His reply was even more worthy of relish. He said with a laugh that the moon currently has no owner. If I didn't misunderstand him, then he means that the peak of the moon's pathway is empty. The sequence 0 is empty. That's not right. Isn't there a primordial moon? Upon seeing this, Klein suddenly had this thought. He had already anticipated that the moon card didn't represent the goddess. Whether it was the faith of the life school of thought, the attitude of the vampires, or the records in the Book of Secrets, they all vaguely pointed out that Evernight wasn't the moon. In contrast, vampire ancestor Lilith and the primordial moon resembled the sequence 0 of this pathway in more ways. According to the City of Silver's history lessons, Lilith had most likely fallen in the Dark Epoch, the Second Epoch. However, the primordial moon was an existence that people still believed in and sent responses to even to this day. Of course, those who prayed to her wouldn't end up well. Why did Mr. Dorr say that the moon had no owner at the moment? As seen from the Book of Secrets, the primordial moon still existed during the Fourth Epoch. Klein almost frowned. Soon he came up with 3 guesses. First, Mr. Dorr didn't know enough about the hidden primordial moon, but that was a very low possibility. Second, that the primordial moon was actually the disguise of another deity, not essentially occupying the position of the moon's sequence 0 pathway. Third, that she was a sequence 1 of the moon's pathway, or was in disguise, and had the corresponding sealed artifact. And one more possibility, it's the response from the moon pathway's uniqueness. Klein muttered silently. The most important Beyonder ingredient in the sequence 0 potion formula, described by the Dark Emperor card, wasn't all of the sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, but something called uniqueness. Different pathways had different uniquenesses. A true god was unique. Other than the first guess, the other possibilities aren't small. What is the Beyonder pathway of the moon? Klein turned to the second page of the diary, and was lucky enough to discover that it was connected to the previous page. I continued pressing, but Mr. Dorr refused to say more. He thinks that I'll rescue him by whetting my appetite. Dream on. I hid my curiosity and scoffed at Mr. Dorr for not being respectful enough to true gods. He casually replied to me. This is the attitude a Fourth Epoch noble has to the deities. This guy is too good at acting. However, I really am interested in the nobility of the Fourth Epoch, so I took the opportunity to ask. Mr. Dorr told me that in the Tudor dynasty, there were 5 noble families: Abraham, Antigonus, Ammon, Tamara, and Jacob. Each family was known as an angel family, and they possessed tremendously terrifying strength. Angel family, just the name itself raises many problems. It really makes one yearn for it. Mr. Dorr said that the number of angel families in the Fourth Epoch exceeded the 5. There were the Zeratul and Zoros family, which had always been loyal to the Solomon Empire, the Augustus, Sauron, Einhorn, Castilla families of the Trunsoist dynasty, and the furtive Anariel and Beria families, as well as the Demonis family, which stemmed from a true goddess, which was one step up from the angel families. So the last winner of the Fourth Epoch was the Trunsoist dynasty. But where did their royal family go? The 4 angel families, Augustus, Sauron, and the others, divided up the northern continent. Just as Mr. Dorr said the previous time, the strongest powerhouses in the Fourth Epoch far exceeds my imagination. However, most of them have been buried in the ashes of history. Even the Sauron family has waned, destroyed by me. In another 1 to 2 millennia, perhaps the Augustus family might no longer exist. Only the true gods appear capable of forever illuminating the real world. Although some deities perished in the Fourth Epoch, they should only be few in number. This makes me think of something that was previously written in a web novel which I memorized. It can be used here with some changes. Ashes await those who fail to become true gods. After the communication period ended, Mr. Dorr disconnected. He's like a prisoner who's released on parole for a fixed period of time. And he does know a lot. When he mentioned the Zeratul family, there was faint contempt in his tone. Perhaps I need to maintain my relationship with Mr. Dorr. Apart from the Church of the God of Steam, Zeratul, and that secret and ancient organization, I should leave another outlet. Unlike the saying, a wily hare has far more than 3 holes. When Emperor Roselle was struggling in the end, he was only thinking about the organization that's suspected to be the Twilight Hermit Order. He didn't mention Mr. Dorr at all. Something apparently happened in between. So the ancestor of the lone royal family, the Augustus family, was actually so rich and powerful to be an angel family. However, why did the royal family of the Trunsoist dynasty, to which they were loyal to, disappear just like that? Klein suddenly thought of a few things, and his desire to clear away the fog that shrouded the history of the fourth epoch and see its true appearance grew. This was also the greatest hobby of his body's original owner. Perhaps that underground relic with 2 side-by-side seats and a terrifying evil spirit will help me answer a lot of questions. Klein lowered his gaze and flipped to the 3rd page. June 2nd, Bernadette massaged my back. It's good to have a daughter. She knows to care for her old father. And although I can see what she wants at a glance, at least she's willing to put on an act. Besides, she did a good job. I asked her which Beyonder pathway she wanted. She said she was undecided, but she liked the maxim of do as you wish, but do no harm. June 3rd. I saw Florin again. He's very different from before, as though he's a different person. No, he still had his original memories and some of his distinctive characteristics, which is enough to prove that he's him. What exactly happened to him to experience such a huge change? Perhaps a metaphor could be used to describe it more precisely. Some monsters are physical sutures, while he is a monster of mental sutures. June 5th. I obtained an ancient book. It actually mentions the primordial demoness's name, not one of an honorific name. Her name is Cheek, but that's a man's name. Is this ancient book fake? Chapter 441. Channels increase Cheek? Was the primordial demoness also a man in the past? Klein almost raised his hand to his chin. He had once guessed that it was because of the existence of the evil goddess, the primordial demoness, that led to the assassin pathway, having members of the opposite sex turn into a female after sequence 7. Who knew that Roselle's diary would indicate that the primordial demoness might have been a male in the beginning as well? This depicted 2 problems. First, the primordial demoness wasn't a naturally born deity, and they had only relied on potions to reach sequence 0. Second, the purely feminine changes in this pathway were inherent in its Beyonder characteristics. Roselle had once speculated about the truth behind the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation. He suspected that all Beyonder characteristics originated from the original creator, so there's no increase, and that the total amount is conserved. Assuming that this is true, does this mean that the creator who created everything is all-inclusive, masculinity, femininity, and gender-neutral all in one? And the demoness pathway is a representation of pure femininity? Of course, that ancient book might actually be fake. There's a lot of information in Roselle's diary entries today. With thoughts flashing through his mind, Klein let the diary disappear in his hands. You can begin, he smiled and said to Justice, the Sun, and the others. Alger looked towards the world immediately. Your werewolf characteristic has been sold. An artisan paid 1,200 pounds for it. According to our agreement, I will receive 200 pounds. Also, I found clues to the hair of a deep-sea naga. 100 pounds a strand, and you want 5 of them in total. If you're fine with this deal, then I will complete it as soon as possible. Klein had promised a higher share of the werewolf's Beyonder characteristic, because he knew that the hanged man had spent more effort and taken on a risk that far exceeded what vampire Emlyn White had spent. At this point, he thought for a moment and controlled the world to reply. No problem. Give me the 5 strands of deep-sea naga hairs and 500 pounds in cash as soon as possible. Now only the human skin shadow characteristic remains. And the amount of money I have has increased to 1,235 pounds, which isn't enough. If I don't want to wait for the machinery hive mind's exploration of the Amon family's mausoleum, I'd have to wait to receive another 500 to 1,000 pounds before I can buy it immediately when I see it. Klein subconsciously wondered what other items or knowledge he could use to exchange for money. Of course, this was on the premise that the target of these transactions was able to pay the remuneration in cash. Hearing this, Audrey raised her hand very slightly, and without hiding anything she said, I'd like to purchase 3 ingredients. A pair of eyes from a mirror dragon, 50 milliliters of its blood, as well as a fruit from the Tree of Elders. Miss Justice has gotten the formula for the psychiatrist's potion. Klein made this judgment in an instant, and the hanged man came to a similar conclusion. I will write to my teacher and ask him if he has one of these ingredients. First thought for a moment, Derek nodded and said, I'll also take note. Corroded mirror dragons aren't rare. Same for the Tree of Elders. In the City of Silver, there's also the Beyonder characteristic left behind by a psychoanalyst. However, it's hard to make transactions for them, and it's easy to be suspected. Psychoanalyst was the ancient name of psychiatrist. When their conversation reached Klein's ears, he immediately manipulated the world and made the dummy hoarsely and gloomily say, I'll ask around in my circle. Oh right, continue helping me find the human skin shadow characteristic. All right. Audrey confidently turned her head to face the person opposite her. Mr. Hanged Man, I'll also look out for the Windbless potion formula you need. She had already joined the Psychology Alchemists and had a secret organization backing her. With them, many ingredients were no longer in short supply. She could obtain them as long as she paid the necessary price. Furs repeated, I'll write to my teacher and ask. Upon seeing this development, Klein felt rather gratified. After a long period of hard work, the Tarot Club had finally developed two major channels, the Psychology Alchemists and the Abraham family. Many things would become simple. The world chuckled and said, Your answers fill me with hope, but you must also take care to protect yourselves and proceed in a way that would avoid arousing suspicion as much as possible. Mr. World, you rarely talk so much. Audrey smiled in reply. I got a little too pleased and momentarily forgot the world's original character profile. Klein immediately remedied the situation and made the world chuckle and say, All of you have become sufficiently valuable. I hope that this kind of transaction can last for a very, very long time. That's why I'm reminding you. Thank you. Audrey gracefully expressed her gratitude. At that moment, Derek hesitated and said, I'll give it a try as well. I've recently completed several patrol missions, but there's nothing out of the ordinary. Very good, Klein said to himself, making the world shut his mouth. After a brief moment of silence, Aldra looked thoughtfully at Miss Justice. I would like to know the details of the assassination of Duke Negan. What kind of reward do you need? Why ask me? As someone close to the Church of the Lord of Storms, shouldn't you already know the full details of this case? Audrey was surprised for a moment, but then she understood the meaning of Mr. Hanged Man's words. He wants to ask about the organization or force that instigated the Desire Apostle, but he doesn't think it's right to ask the fool directly, thinking that it would be too sudden and invasive. So he took a roundabout way by asking me to open up the topic, gently shifting the focus to the things he wants to know. He knows that I'm a noble lady, and that I should pay attention to the assassination of Duke Negan. So he's not worried that I won't answer him. Mr. Hanged Man is really experienced, Audrey said, with the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. No, there's no need for compensation. Isn't it the purpose of our tarot club to freely exchange common knowledge amongst each other regarding their respective regions? Only by doing so can our tarot club expand at a rapid pace. She thought to herself quite possessively. Your words shame me. Aldra was stunned for a moment before he pressed his hand to his chest and leaned forward a little. Klein, who was shrouded in the thick gray fog, inwardly laughed dryly. Audrey lightly pursed her lips, weighed her words and said, The Desire Apostle used a unique situation to complete the assassination of Duke Negan. By using his ability to trigger intense emotions and desires, and at the cost of serious injuries, he successfully broke out of the encirclement, entering the sewers. When the Nighthawks caught up to him, he was already dead. The hero bandit Dark Emperor was present. This gentleman didn't do it to silence him, but to target the organization that entrusted the assassination contract to the Desire Apostle. Which organization? Just as the Hanged Man was wondering to himself in puzzlement, the fool, who was sitting at the end of the table, silently praised Miss Justice and looked at her. He then gave her a reminder in passing. In the outside world, do not mention the name of the organization or write it down. Why? Audrey blurted out in astonishment. Klein leaned back in his chair and replied in a gentle voice, Any mention of it will be known. Any mention of it will be known. Audrey subconsciously looked at Mr. Fool, only to feel that he seemed to be emphasizing something with his eyes hidden in the fog. Mr. Fool is implying that if it's not in his kingdom, or through talking to him, mentioning or writing down the name of the Twilight Hermit Order would allow them to sense it via some means or item. That should be what he means. What an extremely secretive and high-level organization. To a certain extent, it's even more terrifying than the Church of the Seven Deities. And Mr. Fool, our tarot club is looking for them. Audrey instantly felt like she understood a lot of things. She straightened her back and said, "As you command. Any mention of it will be known. A secret organization whose name can't even be mentioned? A powerful organization that I don't know of at all. Is this the faction behind the Desire Apostle? Mr. Fool had sent his adorer to search for them? This high-level situation in the world really is more complicated than I thought. There are even more secrets that I have no way of knowing." Alger slightly nodded his head, feeling both shocked and agitated at the same time. At this moment, he had the urge to pay Mr. Fool for the name of the organization. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that there was no need for that. Although understanding the situation involving the higher-level entities would help him perfect his plans for the future and play an important role in certain situations, he, who was currently at the bottom of the mid-sequence levels, had no way of making contact with matters related to the mysterious organization. What he needed the most right now was the formula and ingredients for Wind Blessed. So he had to save up enough wealth for them. After succeeding my advancement, I could seek an opportunity to consult Mr. Fool. Alger made a note of this. Furs was confused by what she heard. Things like the Desire Apostle and the organization in which any mention of it will be known were completely different from what she had read in the newspapers. There are indeed many secrets behind the assassination of a duke. It's a pity that the organization's name cannot be written down. Otherwise, I can use it as the villain of a future novel. It will definitely be a classic. I still owe 10 diary pages and haven't bought the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. There's no need to spend the money in order to understand such high-end matters for the time being. Well, the secrecy and knowledge circulating in the Tarot Club are 10 times greater than Mr. A's gathering, or more. Furs restrained her curiosity as a writer. As for Derek, he didn't know who Duke Negan was, so he didn't care who was behind the assassination. He sat silently and was reserved, as though he were in class. When the matter regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was over, Furs looked around and probingly asked, "Lady and gentlemen, do you have a way to solve the problem of accumulating too many Beyonder characteristics of the same level?" Chapter 442. Exploration Mission. Alger looked at Furs and returned with a question. "You were forced to drink a second apprentice potion? Why did you figure it out so easily? It's as though you were there to see it." Furs uncomfortably cleared her throat and said, "Yes, let's just pretend that's what happened. What solutions do you have? What do you need me to exchange for it?" Alger glanced at Mr. Fool, but seeing that he had nothing to say, he replied in a calm and low voice, "You don't need payment, because it will certainly not be able to satisfy your needs." Without waiting for Miss Magician and Miss Justice to ask, he casually explained, "High-sequence Beyonders can independently decide whether or not to pass on their Beyonder characteristics to their descendants, and how much they will inherit as a result. Sequence 6 and Sequence 5 will naturally pass a part of it in an uncontrollable manner. Although the quantity isn't a lot each time, and wouldn't affect the Beyonder's strength, their sequence will regress if they have enough children. Such a child is born with high spiritual perception and a certain level of incomplete Beyonder powers." Audrey suddenly came to a realization, understanding the origins of some special people. The Hanged Man nodded. "Yes, they're equivalent to half a Sequence 9, with a certain amount of characteristics. If they want to become a Beyonder, they can only choose the corresponding path. Of course, such people might not be a result of inheritance. It might be the result of them gaining the blessings of a deity, or the corruption of an evil spirit. There are many factors that can cause the same degree of influence. Also, when high-sequence Beyonders have children, they might give birth to someone who's already at Sequence 5. This is one of the rare instances when one can advance without losing control. So that's how it is." Audrey sighed with satisfaction. To her, Knowing more mysteries was more enjoyable than getting a nice dress or jewelry. Furs also came to a realization as she pressed. Then what about Beyonders at sequence 7, 8 and 9? Theoretically speaking, their Beyonder characteristics will not be passed down to their descendants, but that is not absolute. If there's an excessive amount of Beyonder characteristics, there's a chance for them to be passed down as well. That is to say, if you're pregnant with a child, there's a way to effectively reduce the remnant potion in your body. No, one might not succeed, but 3 or 4 will stand a higher chance. 3 or 4. First stared Agape. Klein, who had learned all of this general knowledge from Roselle's diary, couldn't help but think of a joke. Miss Magician, in the future, you can say to your child that you were a free gift from drinking a potion. Although it seems that, according to Mr. Hangman, the burden can be reduced the moment a child is conceived. Having a child would still require almost 40 weeks of trouble. No more than that, it's impossible to leave the child after it's born, right? After grasping the acting method, even if the process subsequently becomes more difficult, 2 months will definitely be enough time to digest it. It might not even take that long. After all, it's just a starting sequence. Furs forced a smile and said, I understand. The best way is still to rely on acting to digest it. Alger gave an affirmative answer. That's the case for sequence 7 and below. After that, digestion would easily take a year or so, 2 to 3 years, and then 5 to 6 years. When that happens, giving birth to a child would be a simpler plan, he added inwardly. There were a few seconds of silence, as the 2 women digested the knowledge they had just gained. This was the first time they had known that having a child had such uses. For Derek, this was common knowledge. He adjusted his posture and said, I've been assigned another exploration mission. Where to? Alger tilted his head and asked. It's still the half-destroyed temple of the fallen creator. Derek answered without sounding too grave. It sounds like there's a certain guaranteed level of safety. Audrey didn't interrupt. The hanged man pondered for 2 seconds before asking, Is the shepherd elder still in prison? Yes. This exploration will be led by the chief. The son didn't hide the facts. This way, the danger level will be much lower than last time. You can give it a try. Alger couldn't help but look at Mr. Fool once more. Unable to read any thoughts from the other party's blurry eyes, he continued to speak to the son. This should be your last inspection before the surveillance is completely removed. Previously, the information you made known was that Amon is archenemies with the fallen creator. They wouldn't mind exposing themselves to spoil the other's plans. This time, by heading to the fallen creator's temple for exploration, as long as you don't reveal any abnormalities, the 6-member council will basically determine that you're no longer under Amon's influence. Mr. Hanged Man sure is experienced. It's as if he was planning the operation. Derek kept it in mind before asking, What else do I need to pay attention to? At the very end of the long bronze table, the fool, who was quietly watching, opened his mouth. Flesh and blood ravings. Klein had only said 2 words, leaving the Tarot Club members to comprehend them on their own. This was the demeanor of a great figure. The hanged man pondered for a few seconds. Then he said to the son who had thanked the fool, In particular, don't look at what you shouldn't. Don't listen to what you shouldn't. Don't eat what you shouldn't. And don't touch what you shouldn't. What are those that shouldn't be seen or heard? Derek asked, puzzled. The hanged man said with a deepened voice, After entering the temple, everything is included. Then how should I explore? Derek asked in surprise. The hanged man chuckled. Aren't there other members? Isn't there a chief? It really is Mr. Hanged Man's style. Audrey subconsciously wanted to cover her face with her hands, but the education and habits ingrained in her had told her that such actions weren't graceful. So she forcefully changed the way she moved, stroking her drooping hair and pushing it behind her ears. The son felt that such a method was quite unacceptable. Upon noticing his reaction, Alger secretly cursed before saying, What I mean is to listen to your chief's instructions. Only do what he allows you to do. At any other times, do not take matters into your own hands. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. The son instantly relaxed. Phew. Alger exhaled. and turned to the woman opposite him. Miss Justice, I wish to know the political changes in Backland after Duke Negan's passing. Audrey recalled the information she had heard, both directly and indirectly in recent times. Duke Negan's death has divided the House of Lords. Although his eldest son is about to inherit the nobility title and become a member of the House of Lords, his prestige isn't enough to calm the dispute. Nearly 10 members of the House of Lords have jointly proposed that the newly conferred nobility should also have a chance to obtain a fixed seat as a member of Parliament. Simply put, let those who are conferred nobility through political donations, charity donations, and the purchase of land become members of the House of Lords. Hearing this, the hanged man Alger laughed. Aren't nobles with a certain amount of history in their family line the ones who despise such people who rely on unorthodox means to be conferred a nobility title the most? Wasn't the ultimate honor and their greatest pride the fact that a fixed seat in the House of Lords was hereditary? Ignoring the inadvertent mockery, Audrey calmly explained, when you have tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds, or even more debts, you will also make the same choice. Owing money wasn't a fatal threat to many nobles, but the debtor could apply to the court and use their lands as payment for the debts. Without the minimum amount of land needed for a noble title, their status as nobles would be on the verge of collapse. And then, Alger didn't continue to harp over the previous question. Audrey gave a rough description. This kind of dispute has put many bills on hold, including, but not limited to, the raising of worker salary, the improvement of working hours, and revising the poor law. It's gratifying to see that the Civil Servant Unified Examination is still progressing steadily and hasn't stopped. And the investigation into the air pollution in Backland is also going in depth. There will be no war for the time being. The hanged man whispered, and he went on to talk to the other members. Worried that staying too long in the bathroom would arouse suspicion, Klein announced the end of the tarot gathering after they were done. After returning to her room, Audrey didn't rush to get up. She first quietly sorted out the things she needed to do after this. Looking at the mirror in front of her, she played with the accessories on her earlobes. With a slight smile, she silently muttered to herself, there will be a psychology lesson tomorrow afternoon. I can tell Miss Escalante that I've met someone in a Beyonder circle who's looking to buy the human skin shadow characteristic and has promised an abnormally generous price for it. I wonder if the psychology alchemists will be interested in it or not. Also, I mustn't forget Roselle's diary and the Wind Bless formula. Yes, I have to find the psychiatrist ingredients as quickly as possible. Audrey, you can't be lazy. Susie is already a sequence 8, so you can't let her overtake you. After pacing back and forth in the room, Furs finally made up her mind and pulled out her chair. She grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and, after mulling over it for nearly a minute, began to write to Dorian Gray. She described how she learned of someone who requested the characteristic of a human skin shadow and the Wind Bless potion formula, as well as her curiosity over the Roselle notebook. The capital of the Rorstad archipelago, the city of generosity. Alger Wilson walked out of the hotel and headed for a secret underground market. His target was the hair of a deep-sea naga. He had no intention of missing a human skin shadow if someone had it. I'm short on money. Klein sat in the living room and sighed again. He still needed quite a bit of cash to ensure that he could purchase the items directly when he received clues regarding the human skin shadow's characteristics. Klein thought for a long time, wondering if he should find other channels to sell the Beyonder characteristic left by the interrogator and stop waiting for Miss Zio to save up her money. After an unknown period of time, the sound of the doorbell rang, breaking the afternoon silence. Chapter 443. A one-man performance. The visitor was a man in a dark green postman uniform. He smiled at Klein in a fawning manner. Are you Mr. Sherlock Moriarty? He asked. Yes. Klein could vaguely guess the purpose of the other person's visit. The visitor raised his right hand and handed over a palm-sized item that was wrapped in layers of black gauze. Please sign and accept your package. Klein deliberately revealed his doubts. Shouldn't you give me a slip and let me go to the corresponding post office for collection? The Lone Kingdom's postal system was a perfect replica of the Intis system, and even the flaws were copied quite significantly. Anything that couldn't be stuffed directly into the mailbox, no matter what it was, would only be given a collection slip by the postman, making the recipient go through the hassle of collecting it himself. Haha, because it's rather precious, so I have to personally deliver it to you, the postman said after a momentary shock. It seems you're not professional enough to be a real postman. Without further questions, Klein accepted the package, pen, and slip before signing them. He closed the door and returned to the living room. He didn't rush to open the package, but he took out a gold coin and threw it into the air. Pa! Klein caught the gold coin and looked down to see if it was heads or tails. A number faced up, indicating a negative response. There's no latent danger. Klein nodded slightly and put away the gold coin. He touched the paper figurine in his pocket and carefully opened the package. After one layer after another of black gauze was removed, the objects inside clearly presented themselves to him. They were a pale gold-colored, elegantly patterned pocket watch, a handkerchief stained with dark red blood, 7 or 8 brown short curly hair tied together, and a stack of notes. Talam's belongings, his hair, his blood, and his daily records are all present. Prince Edisak sure is a very efficient man. It's not even nighttime. Klein looked at the items on the coffee table and suddenly felt that there were many people staring at him at that very moment. An ancient angel family with a heritage of more than 2,000 years would definitely have an unimaginable background. Being involved with the royal family's internal strife makes it possible for me to be pulverized at any moment and anywhere. Maybe I'm already being monitored now. I have to appear mediocre and useless enough to ensure my safety. Klein had already decided what to do, so he took his time checking the pocket watch, handkerchief, and hair. During this process, his spiritual intuition didn't give him any warnings, nor did it prevent him from attempting divination. After having a better grasp on the situation, Klein took out the letter, picked up a pen, and wrote his divination sentence. The true cause of Talam Dumont's death. He acted big-hearted and poised, as though he didn't feel that he was being monitored at that very moment. Picking up the curly hair and handkerchief, Klein chanted the divination sentence while leaning back against the back of the sofa. His eyes turned deep as he entered cogitation. After repeating it 7 times, he came to the dream world and saw the familiar lobby of the Quelag Club. And then he saw Talam Dumon clutch at his heart, his face contorted once again. This revelation shows that Talam did die of a sudden heart disease. Klein opened his eyes and muttered softly to himself. He frowned, wearing a puzzled, confused, and thoughtful expression. He tried several different divination statements and received the same result. He got up and paced back and forth several times. He punched himself in the head, as though he was angry that he wasn't good enough to help his friend or find out who the culprit was. In the end, he dejectedly sat down and didn't move for a long time. In the dark room, he was like the silhouette of a stone statue. That should be enough. I can't go overboard. If there's no one monitoring me, then I would have been fighting with the air just now. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner, got up, and walked to the kitchen. After dinner, he seemed to perk up again before he read the stack of notes carefully, including what Talam had done, and who he had met on the day and the days prior to his death. Home, Red Rose Manor, Quelag Club, Viscount Conrad's mansion. There's nothing out of the ordinary about it. Klein picked up a sharpened pencil and drew circles, marking out the places he would visit and the targets he would ask about in the next few days. After doing all of this, he let out a long sigh. Without confidence, he packed up his things, washed up, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, when the red moon was hidden by layers of clouds, Klein suddenly opened his eyes and woke up. He got out of bed, opened the door slowly, and went into the bathroom next door, hiding himself with a paper figurine substitute in the process. Walking 4 steps counterclockwise, he arrived above the gray fog and sat down at the seat which belonged to the fool. His eyes had become clear, no longer dispirited, dejected, and pessimistic. Soon after, Klein took the blood-stained handkerchief from a hidden pocket in his pajamas made out of old clothes. When he was packing his things, he had used his beyonder powers as a magician to hide the handkerchief on his body. After taking a deep breath, Klein conjured a pen and paper, and he wrote down the divination sentence that was no different from the beginning. The true cause of Talon Dumont's death. After he repeated it 7 times with his body and mind in peace and quiet, he leaned back in his chair with the paper and handkerchief in his hand, and fell asleep in the silent and empty old palace. In a gray, separated, and illusory world, Klein saw a completely different scene from before. Presented before his eyes was a palm-sized wooden puppet, carved with eyes, a nose, and a mouth. There were a few drops of dark red blood on the puppet's body, giving it a demonic appearance. A palm stretched out. The skin was white and exquisite, smooth and beautiful, with 5 slender and delicate fingers that accentuated the hand's flesh and bones. The most eye-catching thing was a unique ring, with an inlaid sapphire on the hand's pinky finger. The hand's index finger was wreathed in black flames, as it pointed at the heart of the wooden puppet. Without a sound, the scene shattered and Klein woke up from his dream. His initial judgment wasn't wrong. Talon had died under a curse. But there was a problem. He had already seen the scene of the curse happening. So why wasn't the scene displayed in its entirety? The mysterious space above the gray fog is able to get rid of all interference. Klein was puzzled for a moment. Normally speaking, receiving a revelation that too abstract and easy to misread was a problem with his limited divination abilities. It meant that the difficulty of the matter he was divining was too high, and that it had nothing to do with the gray fog. It was an understandable outcome, but he had clearly seen the scene of the murderous curse, but he was limited to a small scope of the situation. It didn't provide a relatively effective revelation, and was rather baffling. Have I encountered such a similar situation in the past? Klein dug through his past experiences. Suddenly, he sat up straight, remembering a similar experience. In Tingen, when he was divining the real reason behind the countless coincidences, something similar had happened. He could clearly see the house with the red chimney, but he couldn't reach ensangual and sealed artifact 0-08. This is the power of someone or something that's at the level of a grade 0 sealed artifact that's resisting the power of the gray fog. Klein's eyes abruptly narrowed. No, not necessarily. There are still quite a few possibilities. I have to confirm it again. He put in a lot of effort in order to calm down. As for the method used for confirming, it wasn't daunting for the experienced him. The method was simple, redoing the same divination again. If the revelation doesn't change, it means that things aren't so terrible, and if divination is no longer successful, then something around the target or the target is resisting the gray fog to some extent, like 0-08. Taking a deep breath, Klein calmly repeated the previous divination. The true cause of Talon Dumont's death. He leaned back in his chair and chanted in a low voice, his eyes growing darker. In the dream, all he could see was a hazy, shattered gray fog. There were no more wooden puppets or fingers. Whoosh! Klein straightened his back, his expression abnormally grave. What did Talon get himself involved in? He frowned as he muttered to himself. There's no question as to what I should do next. It's to be passive and perfunctory. I'll first lie to Prince Edisac, before telling him that I'm incapable of figuring out the truth. Phew, this world is really scary. Just the slightest bit of carelessness would cause me to come into contact with something extremely terrifying. Klein sighed. Without daring to stay any longer, he quickly returned to the bathroom in the real world. Tuesday 9 a.m. At the Crown Cemetery. Klein stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a black shirt, black vest, and a black tweed coat, whilst he was carrying some fresh flowers he bought for 12 soli. He looked gravely at Talon Dumont's coffin being carried over, had his soul put to rest, and was buried bit by bit into the earth. During this process, Talon's mother's eyes were red and swollen. She wanted to speak a few times, but she couldn't find her voice. His father's hair was gray, and his expression was haggard. He just stood there, trembling slightly. When the scene reflected in his eyes, Klein tilted his head back and closed his eyes. He waited until the mourners had left before he walked over, bent over, and placed the white flowers on top of the others. I'm sorry, he silently said inwardly. Standing up, he stepped aside, and was about to leave when Klein noticed reporter Mike and Surgeon Aaron closing in. What a pity. I never thought that Talum would actually, sigh. Mike's expression was pained as he couldn't finish his sentence. Aaron, who was always cold, took off his glasses and wiped the corners of his eyes. He sighed and said, "He's a warm-hearted guy. He shouldn't have ended up like this." Yes, he could have gotten rid of his grandfather's bad reputation, Klein echoed. Just then, he saw a female figure in a thick black dress with a veil covering her face walk up to Talum's grave. She, too, was also carrying a bouquet of white flowers. Klein looked away, not paying much attention, just keeping watch through the corner of his eye. The woman bent down to release the flower, revealing her left palm, which was covered by a black gauze glove. A blue gem faintly appeared on the pinky of her left palm. Klein's scalp tingled instantly. His entire body felt numb. Chapter 444. Confession. A similar feeling that wasn't unfamiliar. The experienced Klein immediately used his clown powers to control his facial expression and the slight trembling of his body. Without rushing, he gently retracted his gaze, making the casual glance from before appear normal. Talum was so young. He wasn't even married and has no children. Klein sighed as he went with the flow. He had said this because it gave him a plausible explanation for his subtle reaction towards the woman who had offered the flowers. He had turned sad having seen a woman who had some connection with Talum, associated her to marriage and family, and then finally how his friend had passed away at an early age. Yeah, actually at his age, he should have been married 4 or 5 years ago. Unfortunately, the matter with his grandfather left him with an extremely strong psychological trauma. He had always rejected marriage, and only recently did he improve. Reporter Mike sighed. At this moment, the seemingly normal Klein seemed to have a cluster of thorns stabbing at his back, slowly piercing into his skin and flesh, causing him to feel extremely tense. The girl in the black dress with the sapphire ring on her left-hand pinky had straightened her body and calmly surveyed her surroundings. Afterward, she quietly left Talum's grave with 2 maids accompanying her. She silently walked further and further away from Talum's grave. Phew! Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The feeling of his back being stabbed quickly turned into a cold sweat. Just who is she? And why did she come to the grave to offer flowers? Talum's lover? However, how could Talum, who had no wealth or status, have a relationship with a terrifying person who is involved with a Grade 0 sealed artifact, or that of a demigod? This isn't a novel. Furthermore, she should be the one that used a curse to kill Talum. This matter runs deep. Klein listened quietly as Mike and Aaron recounted Talum's past. His thoughts quickly dispersed, feeling that the most puzzling thing about this matter was that Talum's death, an ordinary person who had no money, power, status, or strength, was actually involved with a Grade 0 sealed artifact, or a powerhouse of the same level. This was simply inconceivable. But this isn't an isolated case. There's another similar case that has happened around me. Klein suddenly thought of something and looked at the surgeon Aaron. This ordinary person's home might very well be hiding a sequence 1 snake of mercury. Following this train of thought, Klein recalled the nearly 5 months that he had spent here since he transmigrated. He was stunned to discover that he had unconsciously become involved with many demigods and terrifying sealed artifacts. The woman who had killed Talum, the snake of mercury Willa Septon, the blasphemer Amon, the mysterious woman at the Royal Museum, a high-sequence beyonder of the Rose School of Thought, 0-08, 1-42, in Sanguil, the mutated sun sacred emblem, the Antigonus family's notebook, Mr. Isaac Eggers, who's suspected to be a descendant of death, Mr. Dorr, the Twilight Hermit Order. Each name flashed through Klein's mind, and every single one of them made him feel like drawing in a cold breath. He calmed his heart and carefully thought, these don't include the true Creator and the eternal blazing sun, who are ranked high above these. Strictly speaking, I can be considered to be among their ranks. After all, I came from a dark divination, and I'm a strange alternate world soul who controls the strange gray fog. Could this be another crest of the times after Roselle? So all the demigods and terrifying sealed artifacts are making an appearance in real life. As these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, the grief-stricken reporter Mike and Surgeon Aaron excused themselves. He then left the cemetery at a leisurely pace. Just as he was looking around for a rental carriage, a familiar carriage drove out of a secluded spot and stopped in front of him. Although the coat of arms on the black carriage was skillfully concealed, Klein was still able to recognize it as Prince Edisac's carriage. Without a sound, the door of the carriage opened, and the old butler with his meticulously combed hair alighted. He politely made a gesture of invitation. "His Highness is waiting for you." "All right." Klein didn't feel guilty at all as he entered the spacious and warm carriage. Prince Edisac was dressed in a dark blue coat with a large collar and a golden ribbon across his chest, which made him look very abnormally noble. He rubbed the diamond brooch, and his long and narrow eyes showed hints of a sigh. "I'm restricted even when participating in the funeral of a friend. I couldn't appear in person and could only watch from afar, sending someone to offer flowers for me. This is the royal family's lack of freedom. If Talem's grandfather hadn't lost his aristocratic title, then you wouldn't have to avoid anything." Klein abided by Prince Edisac's gesture and sat across from him. Edisac picked up a cup of blood-red wine and said, "Sigh. I had originally planned to find an opportunity to help Talem's father recover his aristocratic title, but unfortunately..." Instead of going deep into the subject, he asked, "Sherlock, did you receive the package?" "Yes." Klein answered any questions he was asked, never giving any additional descriptions. Edisac nodded slightly. "Any progress?" "I made several divinations using Talem's hair, blood, and belongings, but all of them led to the conclusion that he had died of a sudden heart disease." Klein used his emotionless, smooth narration to imply that, "My sequence isn't high enough. My standards are limited. Although I'm good at divination, the other party is stronger. And I'm sure that I can't figure out the truth." Edisac looked disappointed and sighed. "How do you plan on continuing the investigation?" "Starting with the people Talem came in contact with a few days before his death, and the places he went," Klein replied according to the plan. Edisac looked at the old butler. "There will definitely be no lack of threatening interrogations or bribery. Pay Sherlock £100 for his investigation fees." "Yes, Your Highness." The old butler took out a stack of bills that he had prepared earlier. £100 straight out? Once again, Klein felt Prince Edisac's generosity. "I'll do my best." He took the £100 in cash and pocketed it without counting it in detail. "I hope that we can put Talem to rest." Prince Edisac clenched his right fist and tapped the left side of his chest. He turned his head to look out the window at Crown Cemetery, which wasn't too far away. His friendship for Talem still remained strong. Klein sighed before he was led out to a carriage by the old butler. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey looked at her psychology teacher, whose long hair reached her waist, and she pretended to carefully look from side to side. She immediately lowered her voice and said, "Miss Escalante, I recently joined a new Beyonder gathering. There were high offers for a human skin shadow characteristic and the Windbless potion formula. A different people. These are likely mid-sequence items, right? It sounds quite interesting. All right. Will the psychology alchemists be interested?" Escalante was startled. She pondered for a few seconds and said, "I'll ask when I return." "All right," Audrey responded briskly, as though she were simply intrigued by such mid-sequence transactions. Escalante retracted her attention and said in a serious tone, "Miss Audrey, although you are already a Sequence 8 Beyonder, you have yet to receive formal education in mysticism. You still don't understand enough about the techniques and applications of a spectator and telepathist, as well as the foundation theories. Starting today, I'll guide you to become a true Beyonder." "That's what I wish," Audrey said sincerely. The huge golden retriever, Susie, who was sitting by her feet, wagged its tail happily, as if happy for her mistress. Having made up his mind not to work, Klein took the carriage back to 15 Minsk Street. He opened the door and was just about to take off his hat when he froze. His spiritual intuition told him that a stranger had entered the living room. Someone had entered his room. He barely hit his tracks. Is it considered a warning? Having a warning is better than not having one. Klein stood in the hall for a long time in silence. Immediately, he turned around and went to the steam cathedral in a rental carriage. The cathedral towered over the chimneys and clock tower, the former representing the power of steam, while the latter represented the beauty of machinery through the hanging of its intricate clocks. It was neither the weekend nor noon or the evening, so there were only a few devotees in the hall quietly praying. Klein sat down in the aisle, leaned his cane, took off his hat, and pretended to pray for 10 minutes in front of the sacred emblem. Then, he picked up his things and walked along the aisle to the altar. He said to the bishop standing to the side, "I wish to make a confession." "Good God is watching you." The bishop, who had a kind face and hoary hair at his temples, walked to the confessional by his side. Klein followed closely behind and closed the door. He sat down on a chair and said to the bishop through the wooden board, "I confess that I didn't adhere to my principles when facing danger, and I chose to retreat." "What were you thinking at the time?" the bishop gently asked. Klein immediately described in detail about Talim's death, his suspicions, the reminder from the machinery hive mind, Prince Edisac's entrustment, and after how he failed to obtain any answers from his divination, he expressed his heartfelt cowardice in the face of the royal family strife. The reason he didn't go straight to Carlson was that he was afraid that not only was he being watched, but Prince Edisac's men were also watching him from the shadows. Once he made his intentions clear, he couldn't be sure if he would encounter another calamity. The steam cathedral was the headquarters of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and it was one of the 3 great holy temples. No one could spy on whatever happened inside. What Klein intended to do was to use the Church of the God of Steam to convey his true thoughts and avoid getting caught up in a deeper conflict. Simply put, it was to comply with what his heart wanted. The bishop listened quietly and answered without changing his tone. "Your choice derives from human instinct. God will not blame you. Go back, God will protect you." "That's good." Klein understood the hint and quietly left the steam cathedral. Standing on the street outside, looking at the misty sky, he sighed silently. "I need to advance as soon as possible." Chapter 445. Live broadcast. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the pitch-black city walls. Carrying a leather bag on his back and the axe of hurricane in hand, Derek Berg stood outside the doorway to a cave with nearly 10 of his teammates. Lifting his eyes up, he saw that, between the stone cracks of the city wall, the dry and hardened black soil was crusting, but a bunch of tenacious weeds had grown out. They were densely packed and resembled human hair. At that moment, he hurriedly withdrew his gaze and looked towards the city gate when he heard light footsteps. As the lightning and darkness alternated, a tall figure slowly walked over, carrying 2 straight swords which were crossed on his back. Then his pale, disheveled hair, his ancient eyes, his twisted, deep, old scars, and his perennially unchanged brown coat and flaxen-colored shirt entered Derek in the other's sight. The approaching person was the chief of the 6-member council of the City of Silver, Colin Elliott, a powerful demon hunter. After greeting him, Derek subconsciously looked at the chief's waist. There was a leather belt divided into many compartments, each with a different metal bottle inside. This was a symbol of an experienced and powerful demon hunter. Derek had previously heard his parents mention that demon hunters were good at discovering the weaknesses for different monsters, identifying the uses of various materials, and were able to use their special cogitation state against the former. With the latter, they could concoct corresponding magical medicine, holy ointments, essential oils, and special imprints. Then, through consumption, smearing, and using these items, they could achieve the effect of restraining the target. In a sense, experienced, knowledgeable, well-prepared, and sharp demon hunters were the nemesis of the vast majority of monsters. The amount and variety of small metal bottles at their waist represented their experience. Of course, this was only a portion of the demon hunters' beyonder powers. Just by relying on these, they couldn't be called demigods or saints. Colin looked around and confirmed that all the team members were present. He then said in a low voice, "Light up. Let's go." 2 team members immediately lit the candles in their lanterns, letting the faint yellow light shine through the extremely thin leather. During daytime, when the frequency of lightning was relatively high, there was no need to use candles in the City of Silver, as there was illumination every 2 to 3 seconds. Furthermore, the monsters in the nearby area had been cleaned out again and again. However, once they left the City of Silver and entered the darkness, they had to maintain sufficient candlelight. Otherwise, once the lightning failed to illuminate the skies, causing a dark environment that exceeded 5 seconds, there was a high chance for the team to suffer from an assault by certain monsters. Intense fighting wasn't the most frightening development. What Derek remembered so vividly was a story his parents had told him. Once, while they were exploring the depths of the darkness, because of a previous battle with a horde of rotting corpses, the candles couldn't be replaced in time. This led them to endure being engulfed in darkness for as long as 8 seconds. When the lightning flashed again and the candlelight appeared, they were stunned to see that only 5 of their original 8 teammates remained. The other 3 had vanished in silence, never to be seen again. Taking a deep breath, Derek gripped the axe of Hurricane tightly and walked in the middle of the team, following the chief in a predetermined direction. A bolt of lightning flashed, causing the plains covered in tall black grass to appear like an eerie oil painting. The exploratory team of 10 Beyonders walked along the path filled with craggy gravel, venturing deep into the black grass. The lightning subsided, and the dense darkness instantly swept over them, almost completely engulfing them. The yellow candlelight pierced through the leather and weakly swayed to and fro, guarding the surrounding area. East Borough, in a greasy and cheap coffee shop. In accordance with the previously agreed-upon appointment, Klein found old Kohler, who was applying butter to his toast. He glanced at the crumpled cigarette on the table and smiled. "Newly bought." "No, it's from the past. I haven't smoked since, but I would always carry it with me, occasionally taking it out to sniff at it. Haha, this will remind me of that vagrant life of mine. Back then, I really felt like I could die at any moment." Old Kohler's tone carried a hint of fear. Klein took 20 solely in change, which he had changed earlier, and pushed it across the table while sitting down. "I was very satisfied with the information from the last time." Without waiting for old Kohler to give a modest reply, he turned his head and looked towards the counter. A loaf of oatmeal bread, 2 slices of toast, a block of butter, a serving of beef stew with potatoes, and a 1-pence cup of tea. "Mr. Moriarty, didn't you have dinner yesterday?" Old Kohler was stunned for a moment as he held the cash. Klein shook his head and smiled. "I'll be very busy later, and might not have time for lunch." He needed to pretend that he was active and serious. After all, he had received £100 from Prince Edisac. Old Kohler didn't ask any more questions. He looked around cautiously, while stuffing the notes into his pocket. "There are some results from the matter you previously asked me to find out more about. Isaac Eggers's bounty comes from a few gang leaders and some intelligence dealers. Well, I don't know who entrusted the task to them, since it's difficult to make contact with them." "Me nine." Klein nodded. "That's enough. There's no need to delve deeper. It's too dangerous." Old Kohler heaved a sigh of relief and said, 2 days ago, someone at a budget hotel on Golden Cloak Street saw someone who appeared to be Isaac Eggers. It said that the person was basically a carbon copy of the picture on the bounty notice." Klein's heart palpitated as he smiled instead of showing surprise. "And then, could it be that the moment I prepared to try for this bounty, the matter is over?" And then, with that clue, quite a number of bounty hunters rushed over, but they didn't find anything. "Well, they said that there were traces of a fight in the room." Old Kohler tried his best to recall the information he had gathered. The intelligence would definitely be sent to MI9 first. Did Mr. Isaac have a secret standoff with them? I wonder what the outcome was. Klein took a glance at the boss who was coming over with a plate. He pretended to mutter to himself and said to old Kohler, "Take me to Golden Cloak Street later. Maybe I can find some clues." It was past breakfast time in East Borough, and there were very few customers in the cheap coffee shop. All right. Old Kohler agreed without hesitation. A total of 16.5 pence. The boss placed Klein's breakfast on the table. There wasn't much beef with the potatoes, but the stew was very overcooked. It was obvious that it had been prepared beforehand. The thick aroma tantalized Old Kohler's taste buds to the point that he involuntarily gulped a mouthful of saliva. After paying the bill, Klein picked up a fork and spoon and said to Old Kohler, "Continue. There aren't many people looking for the believers of the fool anymore. Except for a few stubborn bounty hunters. Many unemployed textile women, including some male workers, left East Borough." Old Kohler went down a list of matters. What? Klein swallowed the beef and looked up. Left East Borough? They must have found some other job. As for where they went, I couldn't find out. Old Kohler answered truthfully. Their families aren't aware? Klein pressed. Some left with their unemployed family members, while others had come alone from outside the city to search for work. Old Kohler had already done some investigations. Judging from the target's choice, there's something wrong. Klein made a mental note of it, and continued to eat, while he listened to Old Kohler talk about matters that had happened in East Borough recently. After making an appointment for the next meeting, he put down the cutlery, wiped his mouth, picked up his hat, and said, "Let's head for Golden Cloak Street." In the only budget hotel on Golden Cloak Street. After the boss accepted a 2-pence tip, he led Klein and Old Kohler to the room, which was suspected to be where Isaac Eggers used to live. There have been many bounty hunters visiting over this period of time. Hee. It made me earn quite a bit, so I have maintained its original state. The hotel owner opened the door with his key and pointed inside. At first glance, Klein saw overturned chairs and rags scattered everywhere. There were no other signs of a fight. With his considerable spiritual perception, Klein cast his gaze under the bed. After staring for 2 seconds, he walked over and bent down to pat the bed. Dust flew into the air with a poof as a gray rat jumped out from under the bed. It looked normal, without any problems, but in Klein's spirit vision, its aura only had the colors black and green. The rat turned a corner and climbed up a wall, exposing its belly to Klein's eyes. In that soft spot, its flesh was green with flowing pus. One could see that his internal organs had similarly rotted away. Klein thoughtfully looked back at Old Kohler, who wasn't paying attention to the rat. "Has the bounty for Isaac Eggers been withdrawn?" "No." Old Kohler shook his head in confirmation. Klein examined it again. He then stepped out and said, "Let's go, there's no valuable clues." 15 Minsk Street. Klein, who had been busy all day, lay down on his bed and entered the dream world. Scenes that were continuous at times, and at other times fragmented, swept past, and all of a sudden Klein woke up. He knew that he was dreaming. A power has invaded my dreams. Klein maintained his previous dazed state, casually sizing up his surroundings. He found himself in a suburb of fertile fields. A river flowed over from the distance, and made a turn around the cliff in front of him. One side of the cliff was bare, revealing a pure white rock. Looking from afar, it seemed to have a kind of holy beauty. Nearly 10 men and women wearing black coats or dark jackets surrounded a hidden underground entrance to the bay. Among them was Klein's acquaintance, a Cancer Bernard. White Cliff Town. Stratford River Creek. Machinery hive mind. Are they exploring the Amon family tomb? But why would there be scenes of it in my dreams? Klein was puzzled. At that moment, he saw the water on the surface of the river undulate, rapidly forming a line of white words. "Your loyal and humble servant, A. Rhodes, is here to report to you on the exploration situation." Klein's mouth turned agape, momentarily losing the ability to speak. Then a voice echoed in his head. "Tell me, why would a perfectly good mirror be a snitch?" Chapter 446. Machinery hive mind's combat style. In an instant, Klein switched to his unfathomable state as the fool who overlooked everything. He nodded and said, "Not bad." Ahead of him, the river surged, and the white words squirmed and changed before taking shape again. "What follows is the exploration process your loyal servant, A. Rhodes, has recorded. You can choose to speed up or skip certain scenes at any time." This sentence froze for 2 seconds, And then the scene abruptly zoomed in. Klein instantly appeared beside a Cancer Bernard, but no one noticed him. He looked around and felt that he was surrounded by living people with lifelike scenes. Nothing about his surroundings looked unreal, making him feel as if though he was there in person. I can even speed up or skip certain scenes. The original form of this mirror erodes is a virtual reality family cinema. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. He took another look at the machinery hivemind members and saw that it was led by an old man in white priest robes and a cleric cap. His face was unusually kind, and his expression was calm and gentle. "Your Grace, everyone is ready." A Cancer approached the elder and said with a bow, "Archbishop, this is the Archbishop of the Church of Steam and Machinery's Backlund Diocese, the demigod, Horimic Haydn? The machinery hivemind really is cautious, and not careless. Who knows, they might have even brought along a grade 1 sealed artifact, and performed a divination in advance. After all, they're in control of the mystery prior pathway. Luckily, I can basically confirm that the fog's anti-divination or divination interference abilities are similar to the cards of blasphemy, allowing the result to be as ordinary as possible, and the least bit suspicious. Otherwise, certain matters might be exposed. However, there's a certain probability that the meeting between Miss Sharon and I will appear. Because, to me, that isn't something harmful. It depends on whether a wraith's instinct to interfere with divination will affect the machinery hivemind's attempt. Wait, the machinery hivemind is highly likely to have relied on erodes, and based on its performance from just now and previously, it isn't impossible for him to curry favor with me by adding some mosaics. Klein thought in enlightenment. At this point, Horimic Haydn drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. "Begin the operation. God will protect us." Nearly 10 Beyonders headed down as Klein followed closely behind. He didn't fast forward at all. He had always been curious about the combat styles of low and mid-sequence Beyonders of the machinery hivemind, and he wanted to take this opportunity to experience it. In addition, he was also greatly concerned about how a demigod really did in combat, as well as the secrets hidden in the Amon family tomb. After being ransacked by time, in a period spanning 1,000 or 2,000 years, the black marble staircase still retained its hardness without any signs of corrosion. The machinery hivemind members followed it all the way underground, where they saw the unique asymmetrical stone pillars and axe blade scuffing from the period of the Fourth Epoch. The pillars stood on either side of the wide road, and in front of them was a large, heavy, dark gray stone bifold door. The stone door had already cracked open, wide enough for 2 people to walk alongside each other. It was completely dark inside. The machinery hivemind members were in no hurry to enter. They carefully searched the surrounding area with lanterns, but they found nothing of value. According to the plan, the first group will begin with a preliminary cleanup. With the Archbishop's approval, Cancer pushed down his hat, compressing his fluffy hair. "Cleanup?" By the side, Klein ruminated over the word. Amidst his puzzlement, the 2 strongest and bulliest male machinery hivemind team members each laid down a long black box on their backs and opened them up. Inside one long box was a sturdy, heavy, iron-black cannon-shaped object. Its surface was engraved with dense and arcane patterns. In the other box was a complex and exquisite firearm, with a chain of pale golden bullets inserted into it. One of the 2 team members carried the cannon-shaped object and trudged to the open stone door. Another machinery hivemind member picked up the peculiar gun, adjusted the bullet chain, and followed slightly behind. After the 2 of them glanced at each other, the cannon-shaped object on the former's shoulder rapidly lit up, outlining burning patterns and imprints before a loud salvo. Boom! A golden fireball, akin to a miniature sun, flew out from the cannon barrel and into the darkness. Boom! The ground trembled slightly, and intense light was emitted from the crack. The body of the machinery hivemind member, who was holding onto the cannon barrel, clearly sank a little as his feet trembled. Boom! 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 He repeatedly used the Beyonder weapon to launch one golden cannonball after another at different spots, causing the tomb to sway without a speck of dust falling. After he came to a stop, The team member with the peculiar gun stepped forward and pulled the trigger. Da, 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 da. The sound of machine gun fire echoed as one pale golden bullet after another flew out, purifying the danger in the depths of the darkness. Isn't this the bombardment effect I've always wanted? Furthermore, they're using Beyonder expendables like purifying bullets and exorcism cannonballs. How extravagant! Is this the combat style of the machinery hive mind? Klein stared with his eyes wide open and his mouth slightly agape. After the series of savage bombardments, Icancer raised his voice above the rumbling echoes and said, "Group 2, do the follow-up cleanup." There's more. Klein felt a little numb from what was happening. The second group was also made up of 2 team members, who used scrolls made of different kinds of leather. They chanted simplified incantations, activated the scrolls, and tossed them inside. The construct behind the stone door was suddenly shrouded by gentle and pure light. Droplets of golden holy rain pattered down, cleansing everything in the area. Klein looked at this scene, and suddenly found it somewhat ridiculous. Wait, aren't you guys here to engage in archaeological studies? Aren't you professional archaeologists? Aren't you afraid that the tomb would collapse from using such cleanup methods? While these thoughts flashed through his mind, the second team was done, and they shouted at Icancer. "Deacon, as expected, the construct's structural integrity hasn't been destroyed." They were clearly prepared. "All right, continue forward." Icancer gave the order. Klein walked in the middle, through the stone door, and saw piles of dirt and debris on the ground. It was impossible to tell what kind of monsters had once been active here, and no one could guess the functions of the mechanisms that had been set up here. After these cleaning up procedures, as long as one didn't dodge in advance, no Beyonder below that of high-sequence Beyonders would be able to withstand it. Klein once again gained a deeper understanding of what the aesthetic of violence was like, and what it meant to be simple, direct, and unreasonable. In what followed, the previous scenes were repeated over and over again. The machinery hivemind team members smoothly approached, exploring one area after another, occasionally harvesting some Beyonder characteristics that were beginning to gather. There are no murals. Seeing the main tomb chamber in sight, the Archbishop of the Church of the God of Steam, Horamic Haydn stopped and muttered to himself in puzzlement. Klein, who was considered half a historian, was equally puzzled. Generally speaking, a noble family member's grave would more or less express their position and honor when they were alive. And when a grave became a tomb or even a mausoleum, it was very common for a mural to be used to describe its master's life when it possessed enough space. In even older and more obscure eras, this wasn't rare, and it was even the most common method. The first thing humans learned was drawings, not writing. Thus, it really was a little strange that there were no similar murals in the tomb of a fourth epoch noble family. Upon hearing the Archbishop's question, Icancer immediately ordered the men to spread out in groups of 2, to search the vicinity for relevant traces of murals. Watching from the sidelines, Klein couldn't help but want to fast forward a little to immediately see the outcome. At that moment, he noticed that the 2 machinery hivemind members in the left corner had suddenly turned into 3. One of them looked identical to Icancer Bernard, his fluffy hair propping his hat high. Klein was first stunned before he made a guess. The moment he had the thought, Icancer walked over to the team member closest to him. "Any discoveries?" He cleared his throat and lowered his voice. The team member turned around warily, but immediately relaxed when he saw that it was Deacon Icancer. "No." Before he could finish his sentence, the Icancer in front of him suddenly turned into a piece of human skin and enveloped his body. The pale human skin tightly wrapped around him, and his face began to form the outline of his facial features. During this process, there were no additional sounds, nor were there any abnormal movements that were triggered. All of a sudden, the human skin began to emit rays of light, just like the rising of the sun. The human skin immediately turned translucent and quickly soared into the air, as if it was being burned. A black whip immediately lashed out, striking its body, causing its movements to clearly slow down. In such a battle, slowness was an original sin. One Beyonder weapon after another, burning scrolls, and pale golden bullets were released towards the human skin. After a brilliant burst of light, countless ashes fell from the sky. All of them coruscated faint light and slowly struggled to gather together. It really is a human skin shadow. Klein turned his attention to the machinery hive mind members, who had just been attacked. The man pulled at his collar and pulled out a protective charm. There were many symbols and magic labels related to the sun on it. Thankfully, the Archbishop got us to wear these things. He held the lantern and sincerely praised. It was only then that Klein realized that his brooch had the quality of the night, his ring had the intensity of the storm, and his belt exuded the sense of physical strength. Although they aren't all mystical items, most of them are in the category of charms and beyonder weapons. Even if their effects will quickly decline, they're still worth a lot. If you weren't an artisan or a rich beyonder, there's no way to gather that much. Is this the combat style of the machinery hive mind? Burning money. Klein felt a sudden setback, and it took him a long time to recover. At that moment, the human skin shadow characteristic gathered and took form. It was like a huge diamond with countless sides reflecting light, and each side reflected a different face. The faces were densely packed, layered, and left one dizzy. I'm just short of it. Klein was overjoyed. After the machinery hive mind handled the spoils, they continued to search for the murals, but they didn't find any traces of them. They had no choice but to gather again and head for the passageway that led to the main tomb. Chapter 447. Portrait. After another series of bombardments, the passage into the main tomb was revealed to the members of the machinery hive mind. The ground was littered with debris. The diamond-shaped beyonder characteristic that reflected a human face lay silently at the bottom of the right wall, glowing with the light of two other objects. The entire tunnel, including the two walls that lined the sides and the stone ceiling, was filled with potholes. However, one thing remained undamaged. It was a frame that was hung up ahead about 7 meters away. It was brown in color, and the wood grain was obvious, but only the side of the frame was revealed. Without anyone mentioning anything, all the beyonders present could tell that it was strange. At this moment, the Archbishop of the Church of Steam and Machinery, Hormick Haydn, stepped forward and said in a gentle voice, "This is likely to be the specter portrait frame that belongs to the Amon family according to the records. As long as one walks into its range and is illuminated by it, their spirit body will instantly be separated from their flesh and blood, turning into a portrait and be forever sealed inside. In this state, even if the portrait is replaced, there is no way of rescuing the person without the corresponding methods. If the duration of being sealed is too long, the body would already be dead. Then, even if one grasps the correct method to remove the seal, the spirit will quickly dissipate." As he spoke, Hormick moved forward step by step, closing in on the strange frame. Klein was a bit worried, not daring to watch the demigod fight against the sealed artifact. But he quickly realized that he was just watching a scene provided by the magic mirror, Erodes. What was there to be afraid of? This is very normal. It's just like watching a horror movie or playing a dark game. Klein calmed himself as he quickened his pace and caught up with Hormick Haydn. The demigod archbishop quickly reached the confines of where the mystical item that needed to be sealed was. He wore a white priest robe and a clerical cap, and his figure gradually appeared in the glass on the surface of the picture frame. Glass? Glass in the fourth epoch? Seems to be the case. There has at least been glass in the fifth epoch's history all this time, and there has been no mention of who invented it. Klein waited with great interest for the battle between the demigod and the strange sealed artifact. Hormick's upper body fully appeared within the specter portrait frame, but his eyes didn't lose their luster. He walked towards the frame, face to face. The silhouette within the painting flickered, as though it was constantly shrinking, yet it was unable to succeed. Hormick stopped, took out a large, almost opaque black cloth he had long prepared, and he covered the specter portrait frame. The frame trembled a few times, but in the end, it was completely covered by the black cloth and turned silent. Hormick seemed to be unaffected as he effortlessly removed the specter portrait frame and finished wrapping it with the black cloth, before tying a knot on its back. This isn't mystic. Didn't you say that your spirit body would be absorbed into the frame and be turned into a portrait? Why is the Archbishop fine? Is this the uniqueness of a demigod, or is it because of another reason? Klein sized up Hormick Haydn, but he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. His eyes are filled with spirit, his expression genial, and he's rich in flesh and blood. It's a pity that I'm not there in person. Otherwise, I could activate my spirit vision and have a look. Klein retracted his gaze and waited for the machinery hive mind members, such as a Cancer, to come over. Hormick handed the spectre portrait frame to a member of the team and walked towards the main tomb at the end of the passage. There was a black stone door filled with scrapes carved by blades and axes. In the middle of the door was a grayish-white disc. The surface of the disc was divided into 12 segments. There was a black needle, just like a clock from the outside world. However, the segments weren't evenly distributed across the disc. They were of varying sizes and extremely incongruous. Furthermore, each grid had half of its surface covered in a shadow. The coat of arms of the Amon family. Archbishop Hormick made a brief introduction. He didn't explain the symbolic meaning of the coat of arms, because presently only Deacon Cancer Bernard was qualified to know. Klein, on the other hand, relied on his own knowledge of mysticism to attempt to decipher it. Disc, 12 segments, and a needle. Combined together, they clearly represent time. It matches the worm of time which Amon's avatar left behind after it was wiped out. What should be 12 equal segments on a disc are unequal in size, and there's a shadow over a portion of it. Does this mean that the Amon family is the dark side of time? Then, where does their title as a blasphemer family show itself? While Klein was thinking, Archbishop Hormick pushed open the stone door without any protection. The heavy stone door opened, revealing an extremely spacious tomb chamber. In the center of the chamber was a dais with a deep black coffin on top of it. The surrounding walls were decorated with iron lampstands, each holding a burning white candle. All the candles didn't flicker. It was so quiet that it seemed like a scene that was fixed in place, completely devoid of any signs of it suffering the effects of time that spanned 1 to 2,000 years. On the straight path from the stone door to the coffin, there were corpses lying on the ground. They were all wearing black tweed coats, half-top hats, or even ordinary worker clothes with a cap on their heads. It was obvious that they had entered in recent years. The Beyonders that previously recruited helpers? How did they get past the area at the front? The human-skinned shadow and the other monsters were clearly still alive. With a mind filled with questions, Klein looked at the corpses. What he saw left him immediately shocked. The corpses all had sparse white hair, dry and wrinkled skin, and obvious markings on their skin. They looked like 80 or 90-year-olds. There were no obvious wounds on their bodies as though they had died of old age. Furthermore, it appeared as though they had died recently and hadn't even rotted yet. It's very obvious that there wouldn't be this many aged Beyonders exploring the tomb. Even if the discoverers of the tomb were old, they would still try their best to choose the young and strong when recruiting helpers. There's something odd about it. Klein frowned and looked around again. He quickly thought of the worm of time left behind by Amon's avatar, and the coat of arms of the Amon family that represented time on the stone door. Making people age rapidly is one of the Amon family's Beyonder powers? The dark side of time. The loophole in time. Could it be that as others rapidly age, the members of the Amon family would regain their youth and extend their lives? Wait a minute. For these Beyonders to easily barge into this place like that, perhaps it was deliberate on the tomb master's part. He wanted to rob them of their time in order to maintain his own existence. Klein looked suspiciously at the black coffin on the platform. At this moment, the demigod Hormick Haydn raised his left hand and pressed it down. You will stop here. Yes, Your Grace. A Cancer and Company answered without any hesitation. As members of an official organization, they had read up on a large number of past Beyonder events. They knew that under similar circumstances, they had to obey the will of a high-sequence Beyonder, and absolutely couldn't act rashly, or else they would die without knowing how. Hormick looked ahead, and his eyes fell on a picture frame that hung upside down at the bottom of the dais. His expression didn't change, as he continued to walk forward at a leisurely pace, not making any preparations at all. The hallmark of demigods is to be rash. Klein was stunned. He seemed to be able to imagine Hormic's teeth dropping, his white hair wilting, and his skin shriveling as he rapidly aged. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Hormic, who seemed fine, suddenly trembled, and a sharp and piercing grinding sound could be heard from his body. His pace began to slow down, his movements became stiff, and his skin visibly dried up. There's something wrong with that. That isn't the aging process of a normal human being. What was that grinding sound just now? Klein muttered inwardly. 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps. Ripping sounds came from Hormic's body as something fell to the ground. Klein subconsciously looked over and saw a gear covered in rust. Hormic continued on as items kept dropping from his body from time to time. There were rusty screws, melted wax, yellowed bones, and loose springs. His figure became increasingly thin and unsteady, as if it could collapse at any time. This is just like a robot. Well, in this era's terms, like a living doll. Klein was suddenly enlightened. He remembered that before old Neil died, he had said that the Church of Earth Mother Sequence 4 was good at alchemical life, and that the Savant Pathway's corresponding sequence was barely able to do so too. As for Hormic, he was a high-sequence beyonder of the Savant Pathway. The Hormic in front of me isn't the real him, it's just a refined doll. Just now, the reason why the Spectre portrait frame was ineffective was that a doll doesn't have a spirit body. The real Hormic should still be far away. As expected of a demigod, amidst Klein's enlightenment, the Archbishop walked up to the dais, bent his knees and back, and turned the upside-down frame over. Generally speaking, when exploring a tomb involving beyonder elements, it was necessary to avoid flipping items over. But this time, Hormic had made the opposite choice. Following the flipping of the portrait frame, a wind suddenly blew in the sealed tomb, dispersing the formless imprisonment in silence. The candles on the iron-colored light fixtures rapidly ignited, becoming unusually bright. However, they soon reached the end of their lives and melted away. The old corpses on the ground rapidly rotted and stank. In just a few seconds, the tomb's main chamber had turned dark, leaving only the lanterns that the Machinery Hivemind members were holding onto to barely illuminate the area ahead. Hormic picked up the picture frame from the floor and went up the stairs to the dais. He came to the black coffin, stretched out his right palm and forcefully pushed. Creak. The heavy coffin lid opened up a crack with a creaking sound, as though it wasn't nailed shut at all. Hormic looked down and said in the same unchanging voice, "There's no corpse." As the scene drew nearer, Klein saw that the coffin's interior was empty except for a pale gold cushion, embroidered with a worm with 12 rings. At that moment, Hormic turned around, and the picture frame in his hand was reflected in the eyes of a Cancer and the others. With just a glance, Klein's gaze suddenly froze. It was a portrait of a smiling young man. He had black eyes and black curly black hair. He had a broad forehead and a thin face. A crystal monocle hung over his eye. He wore a black pointed hat. Amon, you're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.